across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good morning to you. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense, although not our fair when we're handing over with it's Mark Dolan, I can assure you. Loads to talk about today. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and I think we can safely say we know what we're going to be talking about an awful lot over the next 3 hours. And that, of course, is the latest U-turn by Keir Starmer. But is it the 14th, the 15th, the 16th? Who cares? He says he's never going to U-turn again. He U-turns again within 2 hours. The man is a national embarrassment. It's a national humiliation. But it's a very, very good thing that people are going to get a chance to vote in the elections, which they frankly should always have had the chance to vote in. We're just going to pay an extra £63 million for the last minute shenanigans to get those elections up. Oh yeah, and the legal fees for the government and the 100k legal fees for Reform Party as well, for basically pushing the government to do the right thing. Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic use of our taxpayers' money at a time when things are really tight. Don't you agree? Yeah, love to hear your thoughts on all of that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK and your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate and text cost £1, standard network rate message. And whether you are listening on DAB+ radio or your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, it is fabulous to have your company. We'll also, of course, be talking about reform in about an hour's time. They're supposed to be announcing their new shadow cabinet. I mean, not technically speaking a shadow cabinet, they're not the official opposition, but they are, many people think, according to the polls, the next government in waiting. We're going to find out, is Robert Jenrick being lined up as the next Chancellor of this country? Is Yusuf the next Home Secretary? We're going to find out, hopefully, in an hour or so's time. Also, Donald Trump's anti-Semitism czar has said that hatred of Jews in Britain has been allowed to run amok. And he's right, isn't he? So much to talk about. I'm delighted to say joining me for all the chat today is Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Good morning to you. Obviously, what we should do right now is what all the other channels I can see are doing, which is to spend the next 3 hours talking about the US civil rights leader, Jesse Jackson, who was died at the age of 84, a man who did amazing work with Martin Luther King for the civil rights movement, and sadly has been suffering from illness for quite some years now, but also, I'm afraid, was somebody who frankly moved into territory which I think was very divisive, rather than the message that Martin Luther King had, which was to not see race, to judge people by the character, rather than their skin, by what they did and what they said, rather than anything else. But I mean, I suppose we should touch on that very briefly as news. But I mean, it's fascinating how much that is the leading news, full stop, for Sky, BBC and everyone else, isn't it?
I know it's not as if this shouldn't bear mentioning, that it shouldn't be a headline, it shouldn't be a bit of breaking news. As you say, he was a very significant civil rights leader, although, as was often the case later on in the career, kind of went down the sort of BLM identity politics rabbit hole and didn't come out the other end very well. But it's this problem, isn't it, was that a lot of UK media, a lot of UK social media suffers from a very bad case of America brain, as if we're all just downstream from the American kind of imperial centre, and that even figures who, to be perfectly frank, most people on the streets of Britain wouldn't know the name of, or the resemblance of if you showed it to them, suddenly has to be the talking point for hours and hours.
Absolutely. Well, the talking point for hours and hours on our show is going to be things happening here and things happening abroad that actually matter to us. But absolutely crucially here, the government's decision yesterday afternoon, I have to say, absolutely thrilled to know that people were going. I've got to vote in my local elections in London. Lots of people. It's not the whole country having local elections in England. We know, of course, we've got the Welsh Assembly elections, the Scottish Parliament elections. They were all going ahead, but some 30 councils were basically going to be allowed, pushed, persuaded, chose to, but were legally allowed by the government to basically postpone. They say postpone elections, but in some of these areas, they already had elections postponed. When you postpone twice, 2 years, I'm thinking pretty sure these elections are being cancelled. Why? Well, for two reasons. Well, it was all a bit complicated and difficult for them to organise these elections while they were rearranging their desks, getting rid of lots of areas, particularly in rural areas. They've got 2 levels of councils. Fully in favour of the government's reforms to actually get them down to just one, unitary authority. Absolutely fine. The idea that means they can't possibly do anything else, they couldn't organise an election, I think is frankly laughable and insulting. Quite a few million people were going to miss out on the chance to vote. We know that the vast majority of those councils that chose to not go ahead with the vote were Labour councils who know that they were facing a big threat from reform. The polling is very, very clear on that. The government said they weren't going to U-turn on this. They faced a legal challenge. On Thursday and Friday, there were going to be hearings in the High Court. Most of the legal costs, by the way, all racked up well before that point, challenged by reform. They've been criticised by the Electoral Commission leader, saying this is unacceptable. We're not in a pandemic. Don't think it was acceptable then either. But we're not in a war. Of course these elections can go ahead. And now there's a £63 million bill for the taxpayer, you and me, because they didn't let councils go ahead or didn't tell councils to go ahead with these votes. And we're going to be paying reform's legal costs too. What do you make of it?
I mean, as you say, at first you want to celebrate it because this is one U-turn that's going to be good news for democracy, that's going to be good news for everyone who wants to have their voices heard in those local elections. But at the same time, you think, why did they fight this for this long? How bad was their own legal advice that allowed them to go ahead with this? Also, how politically stupid this whole enterprise was. If you don't want to look like you're running scared of the electorate, then maybe you shouldn't run scared of the electorate.
It's a mad idea.
And also, it's one of those things where you're almost quite shocked by the fact that this government, whether it's in terms of the people running it, the level of expertise they seem to have at their disposal, or just sheer political authority, can't do anything. It's a really unusual position to be in with a supposed majority in the House of Commons. It's uniquely weak and incapable to move at this point.
I mean, just ask it. I mean, again, they stand by nothing. They mean nothing. They have no idea, no vision, no philosophy, no strategy. A leader without a backbone. Absolute lightweights in every shadowy cabinet position. I mean, it is mind-blowing how bad they are. I sometimes can't believe when I see policy announcements or U-turns. Nearly always, both are just as bad as each other. You know, it is extraordinary. But this was a direct affront on democracy, a direct assault. You know, during World War II, we didn't have general elections. We were at war. Most of our men were fighting, you know, at the front line. I'm sorry, there was a reason why there weren't elections. But the idea that a few councils rearranging the desks, which is basically what they're doing. It's a paper pushing exercise. Rearrange the desks. You know, are we going to keep this chief executive or that chief executive? That's one 20-minute meeting. Tick tick, move on. I mean, the idea that they couldn't also run elections is absurd. And now they're saying, we've only got 2.5 months to run elections, and it's going to be very, very hard to do that. You can't run a local election in 2.5 months. You often only get 6 weeks' notice for a general election.
Yeah.
Now, it's more complicated. It's by ward. There are more candidates. I get all of that. But seriously, if you are struggling to do this, maybe you shouldn't be in charge of a local council, because maybe you're just really a bit rubbish.
And also, this is one of the most important things a council can do. This is one of the most important, you know, rights that people want to exercise in the area. And it's one of those things where...
Oh, my bin's going to be collected.
Exactly. And yes, of course, you know, local elections don't necessarily have the pizzazz that maybe a general election has, not as many people vote in them, but they are very important. And also, I think we've got into this situation, and COVID was sort of a part of it in a way, which is that various parts of the public sector decided that actually quite essential things were sort of non-essential.
Treating people for cancer during COVID, not essential. Kids going to school, not essential.
I do think
elections, not essential.
And that is a really, really dodgy road to go down. So it's good that this has happened. I wish it hadn't cost so much of taxpayers' money in order to get here. But
should someone resign?
Right,
I mean, there's lots of talk that the local government secretary, local government housing communities, whatever secretary is, Steve Reid, not around today to do the media round and take the flak on this. But, and of course, the announcement was made during recess. Oh, how clever! So there's not parliamentary scrutiny. There will be next week. But should he have to resign of this? I mean, undoubtedly, this wasn't a decision taken by the Housing and Local Government Department. This was taken by Number 10. But I think this is a resigning matter. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't believe for a nanosecond that they either didn't take legal advice before they did this, because they clearly don't actually bother asking anyone anything before they did this. The fact that they got new legal advice that said something apparently completely different, which is why they had to drop the case, because they knew they were going to lose later this week. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't buy that. I think they either knew it was illegal, they were just hoping no one would challenge it, or they didn't bother getting legal advice in the first place. On both grounds, everybody involved should not resign. They should be sacked.
It's so incompetent. That's one of the things, is that if this government was going around and doing quite authoritarian, quite anti-democratic things, but it was doing so with a little bit of gusto, you would at least kind of respect it. It would be horrifying, but you would at least think, OK, this is a government.
There's a purpose.
This lot are kind of, you know, shuttling from one terrible idea to another, digital ID, cancelling elections, more clampdowns on free speech. and then suddenly they have to kind of turn tail and run because they realise they didn't really know what they were doing, or they didn't have the right legal advice, or they wasn't really sure if they wanted to do it in the first place, or maybe they had a focus group and now that hasn't gone down quite as well as they would like. It's rudderless, it's inept, and that was the one thing that Keir Starmer had to say for himself when he was elected, which is that I know what I'm doing, no more psychodrama, we're just about getting the job done.
And integrity. He talked about integrity. None of that.
They cannot even execute the terrible things they want to do. They can't seem to do anything whatsoever, and they seem to be wasting enormous amounts of everyone's time, energy, and taxpayers' money to get to the 14th or 15th.
That's it. I didn't look. Okay, I don't talk about exactly how I vote, but I think you can guess. I didn't vote for the Labour Party last time round.
Green Party.
Green Party all the way. I'm just excited. I'm hoping your party is standing, in my local area. But you know, but I have voted for Labour many times in the past. I have been a floating voter. I am a floating voter. My vote is still not decided at the next election. It never is until I know exactly what is on offer from the candidates and from the policies. But my thing is, they were democratically elected, and whether it was because people didn't vote Tory or people just didn't vote at all, they had absolutely the right to carry out their manifesto commitments. But virtually everything they've done and then had to U-turn on wasn't in their manifesto.
Yeah, that's very true.
Completely, digital ID cards, that came out of nowhere. Hi, Tony Blair. The winter fuel allowance, that came out of nowhere. They're just throwing stuff into the breeze like confetti and seeing what sticks. Basically none of it. And I didn't agree with a lot of their manifesto, such as there was any detail. But should they go to enact any of it, they have every sodding right to enact it, because I believe in democracy. And I know Keir Starmer doesn't. He's busy. He's literally half his time is spent trying to just inveigle himself back into the EU and make us effectively de facto back into the UK, whether or not we voted to go back in or not, because he's not a Democrat. But we knew that before he was elected, even as Labour leader in 2020. But yeah, it's the fact that they are just so bad at what they do. Even if I disagree with the policies, like I would accept it. But if they did it well, but they don't do anything well, it's quite astonishing. Here's my thing, though. Here's my message. Whether you've had elections cancelled and now uncancelled, or whether you're always going to have a chance to vote, you've got to use your vote. Only 30 to 40% of people vote in local elections or in by-elections. I don't care how you vote. You've got to use your vote. There are still people around the world, most countries, most people on this planet do not live in democracies. They might live in a fake democracy somewhere like North Korea. 101% of people voted for Kim Jong-un. Or they live in a pretend democracy like Russia. Most people on this planet don't live under a democracy. People fought and died for our right to vote, and you should always use your right to vote, because if you don't, they'll take it away, because that's what Labour thought. No one will really care. No one will really notice, so it doesn't matter. Well, you need to notice and you need to care, and you show your care by sodding well going out to vote. You can get a postal ballot very easily. You don't even have to leave your home. And your next passing, getting out the car, put it in a post box. You cannot moan about anything that happens in this country, nationally or locally, if you don't use your right to vote. People just fought for it yet again. Use it. Don't care how you vote. Use your vote. There ends the message from Auntie Julia today. Let's talk about other big issues. Unemployment. Up to 5.2% in the final few months of last year. Shocker. There's often a lot of extra employment at the end of the year. Lots of that, the Christmas sales and well, hospitality and shops didn't see that big boost. It's the highest level in 5 years. It's the highest since lockdown, when people were literally legally banned from going to work. We've also got youth unemployment now, higher than the EU. Now, one of the key things that we've had for many years is that we have not had the same level of particularly youth unemployment. Spain, it's been 50% of young people not employed. Now, a lot of that's been hidden by the madness of telling people to get into massive debt and go and get utterly pointless degrees from second, third, fourth-rate universities that don't get them a job but leave them a load of debt. But nevertheless, this is bad.
It's awful, and it's a reminder that on all kinds of different metrics, actually, this Labour government seems to be dragging us back to the dark days of COVID and lockdown. I mean, these unemployment figures being one thing, other areas like house building stalling to the degree that we haven't seen since construction.
And we're all surprised by that.
No, and it was so predictable. Everyone said when we had the national insurance hike on employers that this was basically just going to be a tax on jobs. It's going to lead to fewer jobs. It's going to lead to more unemployment.
So the employers who actually employed people said that? But the government knew better.
Apparently so. And they knew better than basic common sense. Of course, if you're going to make it more expensive to hire someone, then fewer people are going to hire
No, but that's
people.
not common sense in the public sector. Because then if it gets more expensive, you just get more taxpayers' money to pay for your extra costs. They don't live in the same world as the private sector, which is what 80% of us work in.
Exactly, and that, especially when you're talking about small and medium businesses, like the real kind of backbone of the economy, where most people are employed,
Yep.
it's going to not be absorbable in the same way, and yet that's not really at all taken into account. And also just the general economic outlook. I mean, it's not exactly been going great guns under the tail end of the Tories, but at the same time, the anemic growth rates, the general kind of economic mood out there, if you are a employer, if you are a businessman, you're not going to think, you know what, now is the time I'm going to take a risk on this young enterprising upstart. You're going to think, we'll hunker down, see if things improve a little bit, and take it from there.
You can't take a risk on any young people now because you don't know if they're going to turn up next Monday.
There is that as well.
But that's the reality. I mean, again, this is an economic issue. This is a long-standing problem with our economy and our societal attitudes. It's a long-standing problem with government. It's also a parenting issue. If your kid doesn't have the get up and go, doesn't have a work ethic, that's down to you. As far as I'm concerned, that's down to you. I feel really strong. Part of my job is to raise a child who can get turned into a contributing member of society, and you know, that's part of the job. And if you ain't going to do that job, you shouldn't be having kids. But these are some really, really bad statistics. And you're looking at a lot of young people who they're unemployed. And I was listening to Alan Milburn, who's looking in, you know, former government minister under Blair, and he's looking into youth unemployment. And, you know, basically, if you haven't had a job before the age of 24, your chances of getting a job are pretty much zero. You're never going. Who's going to employ someone who's not worked at all? I mean, but again, if you look at all the people, I mean, everyone's like so many young people in our office, and I know people, we've talked about it on air, and a lot of, you know, people in our business, you know, you're freelance, you know, you don't turn up to work, you don't get paid. That's how life is, and that is how life is for people running small businesses. If you're a plumber, you're an electrician, you're a builder, you're a scaffolder, loads and loads and loads of jobs. You don't turn up, you don't get paid, and you learn that work ethic very, very, very quickly. But a lot of people, young people and old, talking about their first jobs, in whether it was, you know, whether it was a newspaper round, whether it was, you know, like me, you know, it was you know, chopping onions in a burger bar, the waitressing and the bar work and all of those jobs. They are the things that make you. And if you don't get those jobs, but no one's employed. You don't want to employ someone 10 quid an hour to do that job when they've got no experience, they've got a bad attitude, and they're not going to turn up. So why would an employer do that? Well, minimum wage, you're looking at over 26 grand a year. I'm sorry, your average young person without any experience ain't worth that.
No, exactly. In a way, it sort of locks them out of the labour market, which is one thing that you would always thought would be taken into account more when you're setting these thresholds. Incidentally, some of the kind of centre-left think tanks, when the minimum wage was hiked last time around, made precisely this point, which is that people who are kind of entering the labour market for the first time are going to be disadvantaged for precisely these reasons. So you've got a Labour government that isn't really listening to any sound advice, whether it's from the left, whether it's from the right, whether it's from the public, and it's being the very
higher wages is good. I mean, improving the wage for people on the lowest level. I completely understand why you want to do that. I'm in favour of there being a minimum wage. And we had Tories like George Osborne who said, "Oh, if you have a minimum wage, you bring that legal minimum wage, then people will lose out." No, but the reality is it needs to be at a fairly low level. Yeah. That's the reality. Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well, particularly if you're young, you're looking for work, or if you've got a youngster, you're worried about them. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Of course, you're mostly free, and I know that's going to be what you want to call in about the local elections. That another humiliating U-turn by the Prime Minister. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call on that as well. Can I just ask you about the latest on the Epstein issue? Mark Dolan was just talking about that at the end of breakfast. But the police, Met Police, Thames Valley and Surrey Police all joining forces to step up this investigation into Prince Andrew, as was. And again, there are two sides to this. Was he leaking information to Epstein when confidential government information when he was a UK trade envoy, and also this worrying view that, you know, that he was basically having young women and girls trafficked to him. And of course, he has denied any wrongdoing. I need to point that out. But, you know, was there a cover-up at the top level? An awful lot of people who have worked in Buckingham Palace, worked in royal protection, are now saying, look, there's just no way senior royal staff and senior royals were not aware of some of these allegations. Hillary Clinton, who changed her tune along with Bill about a month ago, is giving testimony to Congress, I think, later this month. Although she claims she's never even met Jeffrey Epstein, but they refused to do it for a long time. She's now saying, that everybody should give evidence who's asked to give evidence, because they can't compel Andrew to give evidence because he's not an American citizen or American resident. But she reckons there is still a cover-up of the Epstein files by the Trump administration. What do you make of all of that?
There's so much to take apart here, isn't there? Because on the one hand, obviously there are clear-cut allegations. There's police investigations going on into the former Duke of York. All of that is, entitled to his due process, and we shall see what comes of that. As you say, very serious allegations being levelled at his door, and that's something that we would wait to see the evidence or otherwise for. There's also the kind of broader political context in America, which gets a lot more complicated because it's become quite so partisan. There has been obviously a lot of interest in the Epstein files on the right. It was one of the things that Trump's base was very exercised about. A lot of people very disappointed when it felt like they were slow-walking the release of a lot of those files. But now, because the Democrats have kind of sensed that this could be a stick with which to beat Trump, because obviously he was friends with Epstein or various other figures, it's being leapt upon, and talk of a cover-up has erupted on the Democratic side of the ticket. And I think whenever these things get folded into partisan politics in that way, often a clear-eyed discussion of what did and didn't take place, also due process, tends to go out the window. So whilst, of course, there are serious allegations over here, police are investigating, rightly so, but over in America you do worry that this is just going to become another kind of culture war football in a way that will not serve justice particularly well.
No, exactly, and the very real victim. We know there were victims. The question is whether some of them were victims of Andrew as well. Again, he has denied all wrongdoing. 10:24 is the time. Let's take a quick break. As I said, the telephone number, you know already, 0344 499 1000 to have your say, particularly on the local elections. So much more to talk about, so many more top guests coming, and more of Tom as well, and me. Don't forget to use your vote. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. I don't know, I'm just wishing the day away. Good morning to you. It's coming up to 10:27. Let's get straight to your calls. Not surprisingly, on the local elections and that U-turn on cancelling them. Philip is in South Wales, wants to have his say. Hello, Philip.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. Well, your elections weren't going to be cancelled, were they? Because you've got your Welsh Senate elections.
Absolutely. Yes, we have. Yes.
So what do you want to say?
Yeah. I'd like to say that Starmer knew that this was illegal to cancel the elections. He knew it was illegal, and he's a lawyer.
Yes, not very good lawyer.
Not very good. Yeah, and therefore he's broken the law.
I have to say, didn't we establish a while back that Lord Hermer, the Attorney General, his big human rights lawyer mate, who's in government, that everything, they actually went a document that went through every department, that you have to clear everything in case there be a legal challenge. How the hell didn't someone look at this and go, yeah, I don't think that you can use a law that was meant for wartime and pandemics when people are just rearranging their desks in Surrey?
Absolutely, absolutely. And to be honest with you, I think he should resign straight away, because he is an embarrassment to the country. And look out in not even a year, 6 months' time, the damage he is doing to the UK. It's unbelievable.
Well, and the 63 million quid. I mean, what was amazing, there were journalists yesterday asking Nigel Farage when he was doing a press conference and on a walkabout somewhere, and he was asked about this, and people were saying, well, you know, apparently the government, i.e. the taxpayer, is going to have to pay reforms roughly £100,000 legal fees to this point, even without those High Court hearings expected on Thursday before this U-turn by the government. You know, do you think that's right? And it's going to cost an extra 63 million quid, as if it was Nigel Farage's fault that the government had been found to have broken the law.
Yes. Yeah.
The cheek of it.
Absolutely. And what about the cabinet? The cabinet, they're a load of numpties. They are stupid. All of them are stupid.
I don't think they're top notch. I mean, I know some of them, and I actually rather like some of them, but I don't think they're top. I don't think they are the top-notch people we'd be looking for to, if we were choosing, you know, from the whole country, who do you want to run our country? Do you think the the local government secretary, should he resign? But or do you think, as you say, it goes all the way to the top? It's a decision by the PM.
Reid should resign straight away, because what he's doing, I don't know what he's doing.
I don't think he knows I don't think his left hand knows what his right hand's doing, that's for sure. Philip, thank you very much indeed. Before I finish, are you going to vote? I don't want to know how you vote, that's your personal business. Are you going to vote in your elections in Wales?
I absolutely am.
Good man.
I'm voting Farage. I'm voting Reform.
Okay, yeah, I don't care what you want to vote. Green, your party. You've got to use your vote. Otherwise, as we've seen, they take it away from you. Philip, thank you for your call. Ian is in London. Hello, Ian.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning.
I'm sorry, I have to contradict you. We're not living in a democracy. We're living in an elected dictatorship with manufactured consent. And some very, very deep thinkers said that. And Mark Twain said, if voting changed anything, you wouldn't be allowed to do it.
Except voting does change things. I mean...
All right. They didn't honour the referendum on Brexit.
Well, right? We did leave the EU.
No, manifestos are not legally binding.
True.
Defections don't automatically mean by-elections.
True.
And May broke promises. Before she was re-elected, she said she'd give power to shareholders to overturn excessive, greedy executive appointments, and she went back on it.
Yeah. I definitely think you're right. I think unless there's a darn good reason, I don't know, that what you say in your manifesto is what you should do. And I certainly, and I've said to the people who've moved from the Tories to Reform, if there's not an election to be held in the next year, there should be a by-election. I think democracy costs money. It just does. And that's just the cost of doing business. But I don't take such a negative view. I think, you know, that vote in 2016 proved that democracy was alive and well in this country, and all the attempts by the Ramonas, including our current Prime Minister, to overturn it didn't work.
I want to quote Tony Benn, who was a big Brexiteer.
Yeah.
Right? And he wanted compulsory reselection of sitting MPs for election, but only for Labour, which was down. But it should be for every party. If you're sitting for election and you're sitting MP, you should be automatically, like the American primaries. And what else, Tony said? What power have you got? Where did you get it from? In whose interest do you exercise it? To whom are you accountable? And how do we get rid of you? That's Tony Benn.
Oh yeah, and I've always loved that quote, and I've been in a room when he said that live, and it's just, you know, and it holds whatever your politics are, you know. I think. But are you going to vote? Look, we've got local elections in London, and they were always going to go ahead. Again, don't tell me how you're going to vote if you don't want to. That's not my business. But do you bother voting? Because with that attitude, why are you bothering?
Well, the last election I ran as an independent candidate.
Good for you.
I got 500 votes in the general election, because the only choice was not to vote. There's no nota, there's no none of the above abstention box, and there should be.
I agree with you.
That will make people turn out.
I would have compulsory voting, and then you have the option of none of the above. But I'm always in awe of people. You put your money where your mouth is, and you turned up, and you actually stood for election. You gave people an alternative. Good for you, Ian. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Going to take a quick break. Then we're going to hear from Conservative MP Sir David Davis. What does he make of all the shenanigans we've seen over local elections? That's up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 10:35 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, and Tom Slater's still with me. And delighted to say we're now joined by Conservative MP Sir David Davis down the line. A very good morning to you, Sir David.
Good morning. I just spent the last 15 minutes laughing.
Why?
Well, all your listeners' comments. I mean, the last one was about Tony Benn. Tony Benn actually came and launched my by-election when I had my by-election back in whenever it was 20.
God, I remember. Yes. Yeah, you stood down over. What was the issue? It was a civil issue.
It was civil liberties. Basically,
liberties,
it's locking people up for 42 days without a charge. Basically, and so I mean, in a way, it's of a piece with the current bunch, because here you got a civil liberties lawyer, and what do? They tried to do away with jury trials. They've tried to give us digital ID cards. They've been undermining the press, and that's today's papers, and of course also trying to ban elections, or at least defer elections. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. It's the sort of thing you'd expect an authoritarian 1930s.
Well, this is the funny thing. And then you've got the people on the left, the Labour Party, who were talking about how, they have to stop. I mean, I know it's not your party, you're a Conservative. They have to stop reform getting in because they're fascists, they're Nazis, and they're not democratic. You think, hello, look in the mirror, for goodness sake. It's quite extraordinary. What do you make of this U-turn? Whether it's, we're trying to work it out, is it the 14th or 15th? We're told major U-turn. Apparently there have been 25 in total.
On my count, it's the 15th.
15th. Yeah. Depends what you count.
Anyway, it's any number, and they're not very good at them either. I mean, to be fair, dear old David Cameron did quite a lot of U-turns, but he did them with a degree of elegance that this lot can't manage.
And we should absolutely applaud governments who, when they get things wrong or when it's unpopular, that they do change their mind. But the point is, a lot of these things that are done, they're done very in a cat-handed way. No, they don't prep anybody for it. There's no good reason for it. The Electoral Commission was very clear. This was unacceptable. They were using a law that was basically there in the case of a pandemic or war, not for reshuffling the desks in a district council.
Yeah, and they were forced into it. Let's be clear. I mean, it was fairly obvious that Reform were going to win their case. and so the government walked away rather than be even more humiliated by it. I mean, look, you've got, what is it, 30 councils, 21 of them were ones that Labour currently held. I mean, and I don't know how many they're going to lose. I mean, all told, they're up to lose about 1,000 seats, and I think about 20 councils, plus or minus 5.
Yeah.
So that's what they were terrified of.
Well, that's it. If Labour thought they were going to be winning those seats again, they wouldn't have cancelled these elections. We all know that. I mean, no one's under any illusion. The government, i.e. us, because the government hasn't got any money of its own, it's taxpayers' money, is going to pay Reform's 100 grand legal fees, plus apparently 63 million quid being rushed out to these councils to help them do these elections on the rush, because everything's going to cost more now. That should be a resigning matter, shouldn't it? And who for? Is it the Prime Minister? Is it the local government secretary, Steve Reed, or is it both?
It's both, I'm afraid. I mean, it's impossible to imagine that this happened without the authorisation of the Prime Minister or McSweeney in his place, but essentially number 10. But if I'd been a local government minister in those circumstances, I would have walked. I'd have said, I'm not going to do this. It's my job to deliver democracy in local government. After all, if that's not his job, what is? So I'm afraid both of them really ought to go. And even now, even though, I mean, what's holding Starmer in place? What's holding Starmer in place is the absence of an alternative easily available. Rayner under a tax issue, Burnham can't get out of Manchester, and so on. But the simple truth is that's the only thing keeping Starmer in place. Otherwise, I think he would. I mean, truth be told, I think before the end of the year he'll be gone. I didn't think that a month ago, but I do think it now.
No, indeed. I mean, I think, early last week, I think we thought he was going to go within a matter of days or even hours. Now everyone's saying, OK, until the local elections. But he went on Radio 2 only yesterday, the Prime Minister, during recess, should be a quiet time. He said there wouldn't be any more U-turns, and 2 hours later there's a U-turn. I don't even know if he knows what he's doing in government, because, my God, the rest of us can't work the hell out. What do you think about what else is going on in government? We've seen, the loss of the Chief of Staff, the Director of Communications, by all accounts, the Director of Communications, who's only been in the job a few months, Tim Allen, it was because of a bunch of emails that he'd written to Lord Manderson, again, and he's another protege of Lord Manderson, where he's basically been very rude about the Prime Minister before he came to work for him. He's gone. We've got this probe into Manderson. We've got a probe into the decision to appoint him and to keep him in the role. What does the Prime Minister know when? That's going to explode in their faces, everyone is predicting. And we've got the latest, this Labour Together think tank, which is basically the think tank run by Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's former Chief of Staff, that basically created Keir Starmer as the perfect Labour member's candidate, and then as a Labour Prime Minister. But basically, they hired an American company to probe and then smear 2 Sunday Times journalists, and including them, going into one of the Gabriel pogroms, the fact that he was Jewish, accusing them of basically getting information hacked by the Russians. Turns out Lord Manderson's implicated in that as well, as someone who passed on some of those smears. What do you make of all of that?
Well, I mean, it all starts with a government that came in not knowing what it wanted to do. I mean, that's the simple underpinning thing. I mean, it's very unusual. Most governments get elected because they want to do something. Even if they turn out not to be very good, they start out wanting to do something. Thatcher obviously wanted to do something. Blair obviously wanted to do something. We may not agree with what he did, but he had something in mind. So that's point one. If you haven't got that, then what happens is the system takes over. You get nothing done. The second problem is a sort of modern politics problem, but particularly true of Starmer, and that is massive overdelegation to SPADs, to special advisors. Special advisors who, maybe in their 20s and 30s, have very little experience outside politics, never run anything, and also, frankly, think in terms of tactics, not outcomes. So that attack on the Sunday Times, wasn't it? The Sunday Times journalists in the first instance, Gabriel Pogrund and so on. I mean, it's a completely amoral thing to do, but it's the sort of thing that comes out of meetings which they're talking about nothing but tactics. They haven't got an overarching principle. I mean, one or two of your callers talked about Tony Benn with admiration. Now, your programme is not one that attracts Bennites, but They talked about him with admiration, and he was one of my best friends.
Well, I think of him with admiration. I can remember going to a speech of his and giving him a standing ovation, because a lot of what he talked about it was about integrity. I didn't agree with his means to the ends, but I think he was an honourable man.
Yeah, and that's why I liked him. So you've got that. There's another thing which is a bit more difficult to analyse, but to be honest, it looks as though when you look at the government and you look at the supporting structures of the government, Starmer basically appointed his friends to everything.
Yeah,
whether it's Hermer as the
Attorney General,
as his AG, or a vast number of junior ministers who came in last week, basically, and because they're in the circle, have got appointed, and that's part of the reason. I mean, you were saying earlier that you look at the front bench and it doesn't exactly impress you. It's partly because it's just a bunch of mates. It's the sort of it's an Islington dinner party writ large. And that makes it much weaker too. So all those things together give you what you've got.
That's the interesting thing, is because you think about the big beasts of previous Labour governments, whether it's under Blair or in the 70s, and you look at under Thatcher and indeed under Cameron first, you've got people you've got a bit of kind of credibility, they've got a bit of bottom, they've been around, they've got their own sources of support in the party, as opposed to, as you say, just being placemen. And that's probably the reason why he's not gone yet, is that actually no one's kind of ready and no one really knows what the alternative is.
But it wasn't just their support, it was they were big people in their own right. I mean, look at David Blunkett or John Reid or people of that sort of nature. They were real thinkers. They were brave. I mean, these people were my opponents in the day. But and they were a proper challenge at Dispatch Box. This lot are not, I'm afraid.
No, indeed. What do you make of what's going on in the civil service? I mean, we've heard, Chris Wormold was appointed. He'd been there. I mean, look, he was the civil servant in charge of the home of the health department during COVID. I think that tells you everything about this guy not being someone you would want to employ as the cabinet secretary. By all accounts, he was considered to be someone who was just sort of a bit of a yes man to the Prime Minister. They've now realised he's pretty useless. He's going out. We're paying 250k for his payoff, and then they've appointed 2 or 3 people sort of interim to take over that role. But Antonia Romeo, who was a former cabinet secretary, I think, in the Home Office, she's now being touted. She's being the candidate. Lots of stuff in the media, which I think most of my audience and I think most voters will say, I don't know who this person is. I don't care about this person. What is going on? Because you shouldn't really know anything about these civil servants. They should be quietly getting on with the job. But claims about her expenses, claims about bullying, claims, counterclaims, denials, and that. What do you make of all of that at the heart of government?
Well, it's a disaster, and to be fair to them, it doesn't just start with this government. I mean, there has been a very long-term decline in the standard of the civil service. I mean, when I look at the people who were, I don't know, a policy principal back in Thatcher's day, somebody like Andy Haldane or whatever, people like that, there's nobody of that caliber there anymore. So that's the first problem. Yeah. Second problem is, again, it comes down to ministers not imposing their will. I say their will, the will of the people who elected them, on the system. I mean, there's a famous account. I can't remember whether it's Ernest Bevin or Naira Bevin, one of the two. When he walked in on his first day in the post-war government, threw down the Labour manifesto on the desk and said to the Permanent Secretary, "That's your instructions for the next 5 years."
Quite right too.
Yeah, can you imagine to be doing that today?
How do you think that's going to work if and when, as the polls suggest, and again, a week's a long time in politics, 3 years certainly is, if Reform get in as the next government, or possibly a Reform Conservative coalition? Zia Yusuf, senior figure in Reform, has said, there may have to be a patriotic coalition to keep the Greens, Labour and Lib Dems out. A, would you support coalition? And B, what do you make of the chances of any government that is that is Reform only or Reform and Tories being able to pursue any of their manifesto pledges with the civil servants as it currently exists?
Well, firstly, it determines on already having made up your mind on what you want to do. I mean, that's what this government had, I think they called a Ming vase strategy. Yeah. Don't drop anything, don't break anything, which meant don't do anything, right? Now, I don't think you can accuse either Badenoch or Farage of having that weakness. Yeah. Both of them are very clear, at least in principle, what they want to do. What will determine how successful they are is really how clearly thought through they've actually thought the details. What sort of growth policy you have, what sort of health care system you're going to have, what you're going to do about defence spending. The big questions, they're going to have their decisions already taken the day they walk in the front door.
Absolutely.
If they've done that, they've got a chance. They're in with a decent chance. And you know what? If they've told the people that in advance, that will also deliver. There's one other thing that might affect...
Very briefly, yeah.
All right, yeah. And that is, when Thatcher came in, she had the advantage, believe it or not, of having had a crisis. Not her, but the country had a crisis, the IMF and all the rest of it. We're going to have had a crisis by the time we get there. That will authorise lots of things.
On that happy note, happy Tuesday, everybody, from Sir David Davis, Conservative MPs. David Davis, always good to get you on. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online, listening to all of that.
Well, never let a good crisis go to waste and all that, I suppose, is another watchword here. But it just reminds us, doesn't it, what politically volatile times we already live in, let alone with the kinds of economic or other crises that could be on the horizon if things don't get stabilised anytime soon.
And I don't see how that happens under this government. There we are, 10:48 is the time. I'm going to take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking about, Jew hunting on Britain's streets. That's what it's being called at the moment. And also the Trump's own anti-Semitism czar accusing Britain of having Jew hatred running amok. We're going to be talking about that up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 10:51 is the time. Let's talk about Jew hunts. Now, that's the sort of thing you thought happened in Berlin in the 1930s, but it's being accused of happening in places like Brighton, Sheffield and elsewhere in this country. Is it actually a Jew hunt? Well, it depends on your perspective, but people going door to door, often the Green Party, and saying, will you join us in our ban on buying anything or investing at all in Israel? And if you don't support us, can we note down your name and where you live? Well, why are they doing that? Well, let's talk about this with Alex Hurd. He's the Director of Labour Against Anti-Semitism and joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
I wish there didn't have to be a group called Labour Against Anti-Semitism, or indeed anybody against anti-Semitism. It should just be a given in a civilised society. Any political party feels that way. Your party has had its problems. It's still the only political party in this country that's actually, had a formal, basically, ruling that it has a problem with anti-Semitism and racism, extraordinarily. Everyone thought it was all going to be sorted out under Keir Starmer, but now we have the Green Party, we've got your party, we've got a number of other people on the left of your party where, frankly, many Jews would consider anti-Semitism is absolutely rife. What is going on?
Yes, we've seen the rise of the populist left, and it's very frightening for the Jewish community. they talk in the language of Soviet-era anti-Zionism, which was a cover for classic anti-Jewish racism. So we see this rolling out with the example of Matt Lucas, who's never spoken about the conflict in Gaza. And yet a man tried to publicly humiliate him by forcing him to take a purity test.
So, while he was on the tube, he was on an escalator on the tube. And there's a video doing the rounds of Matt Lucas. Okay, Matt Lucas, I'm not a particular fan of some of his politics, particularly on the issue of women's rights versus trans rights. And I don't care what someone's religion is, you've got the right to walk on the tube and not be harangued because you have a particular religion, that you have to have a particular view on an issue.
Exactly. So he was no longer a comedian, no longer an actor, no longer a presenter. All of his achievements and identity were boiled down to just being a Jew.
Being a Jew.
And Jews need to apparently justify our existence because we're collectively responsible for the real or imagined crimes of a foreign country by the self-appointed righteous people, TM. But of course, no one should have to justify their existence. And now, as you said, people could be coming to your home to check your ideological purity about Jews in Sheffield, Brighton, Bristol, London.
Although they can come to my home. I mean, I literally invite them, come to my home and see how that works out for you.
Yeah, they're knocking on doors. They're making lists. What do they do
they're making. Why? Yeah. What are they making lists for? They said this is just normal canvassing and campaigning, but people have been challenging them. And I think basically, if you do see this, Clara, you need to go out and challenge these people peacefully, absolutely. But police are now investigating a group of pro-Palestine canvassers accused of engaging in a Jew hunt as they went door to door. This is in Sheffield, and they're members of the Sheffield Apartheid Free Zone. I mean, what on earth is that about? The idea that people of Sheffield should be worrying about what's going on in the Middle East. Yet we're all allowed to have our views on international affairs. But the idea that this is like an absolutely vital issue. And again, I find it fascinating. The people who are campaigning about Palestine, and they're welcome to that view, they're welcome to be concerned about what's happening in Gaza, they're welcome to criticise the Israeli government, as long as it's based on facts, not made up nonsense about genocide, which is simply factually untrue. But they seem to be remarkably concerned just with one government in the Middle East, which they can accuse of wrongdoing, remarkably relaxed about other governments in the Middle East who are brutalising, murdering, torturing and imprisoning their people. They don't seem to be bothered by those people at all. Syrians not bothered, Iranians they're not bothered, Saudis not bothered by any of them.
They're completely fixated. They're like a sort of totalitarian enforcement brigade. And you're right, the footage appears to show a woman in Sheffield being physically attacked. Because when opposing Jews forms part of your identity, being challenged can feel like a personal attack. And this lot are supported by a Green Party MP. Now, Jews know very well how anti-Zionist campaigns go. No one is ever pure enough for these inquisitions. Jews fled the Soviet Union, they were expelled from communist Poland and fled the Middle East, except for Israel, because of anti-Zionist campaigns. And this will make Jews feel extremely unsafe.
And again, it is possible to criticise Israel and not be anti-Semitic. Of course it is. However, it is often used as a cover, and certainly most of the people that I know who feel very strongly anti-Israel, again, the only real explanation is you just got a problem with the only Jewish country in the world, and it's as simple as that, and that's the issue. Zach Polanski, who himself comes from a Jewish family, he basically is covers for the Green Party's policies on this, but saying, I'm Jewish myself and I criticise Israel, so that's okay. But the Green Party seems to be, I mean, I would say it's a good thing. They're less and less obsessed with their green hysteria, but terribly, terribly worrying and dangerous thing that their focus seems to be almost entirely now Gaza.
Oh, no, the climate's fixed now. No need to talk about that at all. It's all about Gaza. Look, Zach Polanski changed his tune a couple of years ago. It seems to me quite opportunistic. And now Green Party activists are reviving anti-Semitic Soviet campaigns from the 1970s.
And that is where it came from. This is absolutely where it started, a lot of this. What do you make of the, I mean, again, I suppose it's true, Trump has this anti-Semitism czar. He's Ambassador Yehuda Kaplan, and he's basically said that the hatred of Jews has been allowed to run amok in Britain. What do you say to that?
I mean, there's something in that. The CST recorded the second ever highest total, showing we've reached a new normal since October the 7th. And the pretext of Israel-Palestine was used in a racist context against Jews for the majority of cases. Yeah. And after October the 7th, and after the Manchester synagogue attack, and after the Bondi Beach killings in Sydney, we saw a spike in racist attacks against Jews in Britain. So these were celebratory, and this shows us that it excites some people, it empowers them to want to harm more Jews.
Yeah. Absolutely. A message I say to people, you know, whether you're Jewish or not, whether you live in a Jewish area or not, if you don't speak out on this, you're part of the problem. People have to speak out. This is the canary in the coal mine. People need to speak out. And I say, these people are welcome to come to my door any bloody day of the week. Come on in. Let's play. Alex Hearn, Director, Labour Against Anti-Semitism. Thank you. Tom Slater, listening to all of that.
Such a depressing reminder that there are so many people who run around claiming to care about racism, claiming to care about cohesion, yet the world's oldest hatred makes a roaring comeback, that it puts into, frankly, the dust all of the conversations we used to have about microaggressions and whatnot. Anti-Semitic violence on our streets, anti-Semitic harassment on our streets, threats of violence, graffiti, so on and so forth. And they're not just staring at their shoelaces, they're often the same people engaging in it. So this shames the entire anti-racist
and again, people who just say, again, I know I talk about it a lot, people go, why are you always talking about this? Because it's a problem we need to talk about, and because you might not think it's a problem for you now, it will be a problem for you now. These same people will come for you next. I'm promising you that is what happens. That's what history teaches us. Up next, more on these local elections and that U-turn. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 3 minutes past 11 is the time. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. And whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker watching on YouTube or your connected device, it is great to have your company. Don't forget, you can go to my YouTube page if you miss anything from the show, with you all the way till 1. But if you miss anything, you can just go and look at that on YouTube and you can hit subscribe. You never have to miss a thing. Coming up in this hour, we're going to spend the entire next 2 hours discussing the death of Jesse Jackson, the US civil rights campaigner. Oh, no, sorry, that's BBC and Sky. No, we're going to be talking about stuff that actually matters in this country. Yes, he was a very significant figure. I don't know, with all due respect, Sky, that I've got these TVs on. I've got a bank of, I've got us, I've got Sky, I've got BBC, I've got everything. I don't know if he was necessarily worth the entire last hour of news. BBC, I would say 45 minutes of the last hour. We're talking about stuff that actually matters to, I don't know, crazy idea, British people in Britain. And yeah, we talk about foreign affairs a lot, but you know what happens in Ukraine, what happens in Israel does actually have a long-term impact on us. But I'm not entirely sure that the death of Jesse Jackson is perhaps as big a story as they think it is. But there we are. We're going to be talking about the latest U-turn by Keir Starmer. Is his 14th, his 15th, his 16th? Who knows? It's always another U-turn from Keir Starmer. It's another week, it's another U-turn. Them's the rules. The government has abandoned their plans to cancel local elections. Why? Well, because they faced a legal threat from Reform. And basically, they got legal advice saying that what they were planning to do was actually against the law. Which is a bit weird for a government that was going to end the chaos and was going to be the epitome of integrity, isn't it? Did they take any legal advice before they decided to cancel those elections? Even the boss of the Electoral Commission, the independent body that runs the elections and decides how they're run, actually said they didn't think it was allowed and it was the wrong thing to do. So why on earth were they doing it? Oh, they were running scared of the polls, which said that which party? Reform Party was going to be beating them in those local elections. Well, they are now going ahead on the 7th of May. We'll be discussing more of that. Can't get a Reform guest on because they're all busy at a press conference right now. It's about to start, where Reform are going to announce their shadow cabinet. Not officially the shadow cabinet. They've only got MPs, 8 MPs. They are not the official opposition. But we're going to find out who their Chancellor, their Home Secretary, etc. would actually be in the event of a Reform victory. So we'll get to you that live as soon as it gets going. Plus, we're going to be talking about Donald Trump attacking Ed Miliband. Well, I mean, just for everything, really, but particularly over his apparent green energy deal, which is just a piece of paper that means nothing. But nevertheless, he says it's with loser California Governor Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is very likely to be the Democrat candidate at the next US presidential election. And if you thought Ed Miliband was bad at this stuff, wow. You ain't seen nothing yet when you see what that man has done to California. Anyway, that's all coming up. Plenty more coming up on all of these big topics. Delighted to say that joining me still for the rest of the show is Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Morning.
Morning again.
So much to talk about today. Not just Jesse Jackson. I mean, can I ask you, genuinely, Jesse Jackson was a huge figure in the US civil rights movement. Not in the British civil rights movement. We didn't have to have one because we didn't have laws that prevented black people from voting and having equal rights. Not a thing. We didn't import our entire black population as slaves, as the Americans had done at that time. Huge figure, working alongside Martin Luther King. Later, though, became, I mean, frankly, I've got to be honest with you, I'm going to call him what I thought he was. I think a race baiter as part of the Black Lives Matter movement. There's definitely some accusations that were made against him for some anti-Semitic comments. I don't know what was in his heart. I think he's one of those many people who starts believing their own publicity, as many people on many different arguments and things do when they become very big figures and they're constantly, hailed as a hero. But I mean, why do you think that on the day, OK, I know this news on the local elections was announced yesterday, but it has huge implications for millions of people. Big question marks at any normal time about whether or not the local government secretary, the Prime Minister, government lawyers who said it was originally illegal should have to resign over the extra £63 million cost to taxpayers. No small sum of money to us when times is hard. Whether they should resign or not over this. And they're talking about a bloke in the United States.
It's puzzling, isn't it? I think that there's large sections of the media that do kind of already consider us to be kind of the 51st state. They kind of certainly carry on like that. They think that we're just downstream from American culture, downstream from American politics. And of course, that's true up to a degree.
Well, they tried to import that with Black Lives Matters.
And it just doesn't work.
Like our police are going around just randomly shooting black men, apparently, because they're not.
I have genuinely been surprised that we've been sat here in our colleagues at rival broadcasters have continued to cover this story, not least because, you know, Jesse Jackson, as you say, is a quite flawed figure in many respects. So it's not as, in quite the same terms, shall we say, as if a more uncontroversial figure from the American Civil Rights Movement had passed on, or someone of an even larger stature. But
I mean, it's worth talking about.
Of course.
But I mean, I mean, certainly since I've been in the studio, 1 hour and 8 minutes so far on Sky, and I would say 45, 50 minutes on BBC out of the last hour and a bit.
It just doesn't make any sense. And also, as I say, I don't think this comes from a perspective of deep knowledge and wish to impart that about the US Civil Rights Movement. I think people just have got such warped priorities about what people are interested in. Yep. And also, I think often kind of sneering about the grubby business of domestic politics. Like, who cares about local elections, really? Who cares about what's going on with Keir Starmer or Reform and their announcements, what have you? Isn't this so much more glamorous and exciting because it's American? I think there's a lot of that. I think
you're right. There is a lot of that. Well, look, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the stuff they're sneering about, because we do care about this. And I'm sorry, I really do think that voting, I don't care whether it's the local elections, if we got to vote for the local dog catcher, I'd be voting. As far as I can remember, I have never missed a vote anywhere. Postal ballot, nearly always, because I used to be a journalist. You know, you sent out and about, and you wouldn't know whether you were going to be at home for the elections. I consider voting in all elections very important. You can't moan about your bins. You can't moan about, you know, the local pothole mending and things if you haven't voted. You know, and I don't often get the government I want or the local government I want, and they don't often do the things they say they'll do. My local council absolutely promised we'd have weekly bin collections. They did literally 2 weeks later, went fortnightly. You know, and I think they should be punished for that until the day, you know, the day they're gone. But the Prime Minister, 2 hours after saying that he weren't going to be any more U-turns on Radio 2 yesterday, I mean, you've got to laugh. 14th, 15th, 16th, whichever, another U-turn, humiliating. But this was a decision to cancel local elections. The Electoral Commission chair opposed it. The idea was that basically having all these councils that are rearranging, and they so basically you'd be voting, and then a year later you'd be voting again. But actually, this reorganising of local councils is taking a lot longer, because the people who run local councils are utterly useless at what they do. But the rearranging of the desks, basically, and the cost and the effort, and they simply couldn't manage doing all of that at the same time, was the reason why. But they used a law that was very clearly about basically emergency situations, absolutely huge situations, like being at war, you can postpone elections, as we did in the Second World War. During a pandemic, in 2020, elections were basically cancelled. I mean, they didn't say postponed, they were cancelled in 2020. And they tried to do it again in 2021. I know people like Spiked were speaking up about it. I found some old tweets of mine speaking up about it. And basically people went, yeah, you're not getting away with it, matey. And they went ahead pretty much everywhere. But to claim that the rearranging of the desk is a justification of this is insulting. No,
it is insulting, and it reveals just how little care they have for democracy. I think you made the point earlier in the show that they thought, oh, no one would really care, or this doesn't really matter, or local elections, the turnout's low, who will even notice? Everyone noticed, because people really care about their vote at a time when they feel like it's being taken away from them. Didn't Brexit certainly tell us that? And I think it's hilarious that you have Keir Starmer effectively U-turning on his no U-turns announcement just the other day. There's some debate as to whether or not we're on the 14th or the 15th. He seems to have more U-turns than a dyspraxic on his first driving lesson. It's fascinating how he's gone about with this. But isn't this what happens when you don't really believe in very much and you're quite inept? I suppose it's the combination of those two things. Keir Starmer doesn't really have much politics to him behind it, but besides a few kind of niche things he's quite into, international law and so on. Beyond that, he's blown this way by Morgan McSweeney for a while. He's been blown this way by
last person who speaks
Sue
to him.
Gray for a while.
No backbone, no ideology, no heart, no soul, no nothing.
He reads out a speech, he then takes offence to it into formally behind
That's the Island of Strangers speech,
And then combined with that at the same time, both himself, the cabinet, obviously the top civil servants, the person he's just sacked, Chris Wormald, is notorious for being a kind of plodding old duffer in Whitehall. They're all really inept. So you've got no plan and you've got no people who can actually implement it. And here we are.
Here we are. Well, look, let's talk about someone who says he does have a plan. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage is speaking at a press conference in Westminster, announcing who's going to be basically in his cabinet if he does win the next election, announcing a senior team. Let's go live to Nigel Farage in Westminster.
Somebody at the top of this department who's done well himself in the real world. So please welcome to the stage our head of BTE, Richard Tice.
everybody, and thank you, Nigel, indeed. I just want you to imagine an economy that's growing at 2.5 to 3.5, sometimes 4%, year in, year out. That's what we had in the 80s and 90s. But sadly, anybody under the age of about 40 to 45 doesn't know what that feels like. That's where we've got to get back to. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we need a new super department covering business, trade, energy, including housing, with a total focus on growth and prosperity. And it makes complete sense that such a department is led by someone with a successful track record in business, who's made hundreds of millions for shareholders, investors and lenders alike, and who brings together a team of successful business people in order to ensure that we create the right conditions to achieve those sort of levels of growth. For example, people who understand what it is to have smart and safe regulations, but to get rid of what I call the daft, the dither and delaying regulations. Someone who understands that to be a rich nation, you have to have cheap energy, as we had in the 1980s.
Well, that's Richard Tice speaking, just as you heard. He's going to be Deputy Prime Minister in the event of a reform government to Nigel Farage. I'm going to guess Nigel Farage. I didn't know at the beginning. Going out on a limb, Nigel Farage is going to be the PM if he does win. Business, Trade and Energy Department, and also adding in housing. That's a big department, Tom Slater. I mean, you know, you would expect that the man who basically led the party in the interim when Nigel Farage had left to go into sort of media and broadcasting, that he would get a big department. But he's certainly a businessman himself. But business, trade, energy, we know he's been absolutely at the forefront of the anti-net zero madness, but also bringing housing into that, because that is about business and energy costs as well. That's sort of bigger than the departments that Angela Rayner had as deputy PM and John Prescott had when he was deputy PM.
No, exactly, especially because the received wisdom in Whitehall is often that departments are too bloated, too big. There's too many different things that a cabinet member might have to keep an eye on, and therefore that can become a real problem. So I do wonder how much part of this is the fact that, given the fact that they've got a limited number of MPs, given the fact that there's lots,
to add a bit in,
and that maybe this sort of merging of various responsibilities might look a little bit different come the end of another election. But no, it's interesting that those things are being put together, and also this is clearly a recognition of the fact that now that there have been more people kind of coming into reform of kind of higher political profile, the prospects of Richard Tice being a sort of shadow chancellor seemed a bit slighted. This is obviously recognition of the fact that he has put in a lot of work in this brief for reform, and that is being particularly recognised.
I'm thinking, I mean, realistically, I mean, we'll come back in as we get the next announcements, but I don't think we'll take the whole thing live, because I'd rather we had our discussions rather than put out party political broadcast.
Quite,
but I mean, the expectation is that Robert Jenrick would be their chancellor in the event of winning. Again, not technically speaking shadow chancellor, being Treasury spokesman. Only the official opposition gets the official shadow title. It doesn't really stop the Lib Dems and others using those titles, though, does it? But again, there was a lot of talk, wasn't there, when Kevin Badenoch suddenly announced that Jenrick had been sacked and that he was obviously in talks. And let's face it, I mean, he talks a good game, but he absolutely wasn't ready to go. Talks hadn't been finalised, and he absolutely lost his negotiating position with Nigel Farage that moment, didn't he? When he was already out of the Tories. But whether or not he would get a big role on that. But I know that from speaking to people in the Reform Party, they have been very impressed with Jenrick's sort of performances on social media. The videos on X, on TikTok, and the like. That's a big issue. Nigel Farage just announcing the next role. Let's go back to Nigel Farage live in Westminster about who would be in his cabinet.
We should make a nice change, but taking on the very responsible and important role of Shadow Chancellor is Robert Jenrick.
So that's the announcement. As we were just talking about, we expect Robert Jenrick only moved from the Tories in the last couple of weeks to be Shadow Chancellor. Obviously, those negotiations did go well. He had, of course, actually worked in the Treasury at one point in his junior ministerial role. Let's go live to what Robert Jenrick is saying.
I didn't keep you waiting this time. Look, we all know that our economy isn't working. And why is that? Well, we've had decades of mismanagement. But this Labour government is in a league of its own. Its record is tantamount to vandalism. It promised stability. It's delivered chaos. It promised to lower bills, but they've kept on rising over and over again. Why? Well, in part, because of its crazy energy policies. They said that they wouldn't increase taxes. Well, they've increased taxes over and over again. £60 billion of tax rises to fund their waste. And because they haven't got the courage to tackle our ballooning welfare bill. Businesses are fighting for survival right now. Factories are closing. Investors are leaving the country. And people are suffering. Everyone in the country feels hard up right now. People are working all hours, and then they get to the weekend, and they've got nothing left. The normal expectations of life, they feel like luxuries right now.
Right, well, we'll leave Robert Jenrick to his... again, these are political broadcasters and purposes, aren't they, Tom Slater? And that's not a surprise that Robert Jenrick would be in that role. As a good communicator, it was somebody who the Tories, it was a much narrower second place for him against Kemi Badenoch when he ran for the leadership. It was seen as somebody that if things were not starting to look up for Kemi Badenoch as Tory leader, that he would be sitting there ready to go after the local elections, where no one is expecting to be good news for Kemi Badenoch. I mean, the story will certainly be bad news for Keir Starmer, the Labour Party, but there's unlikely to be much good news for Kemi Badenoch. I mean, a lot of these councils where they were not going to be cancelled for their elections, and some where they were going to be cancelled where Tories were going to be accepted on. Again, we don't know how people vote today, but according to the polls, would lose their seats. No, it's going to be disastrous for them, and I think whilst them being more disastrous or more immediately obviously disastrous for the Southern government, it's something going to be a clear subplot there. And this is another reminder of how much authority she's lost. Someone who was so core to her team, although in a slightly more junior role, having defected and now being on stage with the presumptive biggest party at the next parliament. Absolutely. So very significant. We're going to take a very quick break now, and we're going to be coming back with later announcements from Reform about who's next in their shadow cabinet. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Let's go straight back to Nigel Farage and his announcement about his latest announcement, who's going to be in his shadow cabinet. Zia Youssef, the latest name. This is a Talk.
After manifesto, just not telling the truth. I'm talking, of course, about both legal and illegal immigration. Please welcome Zia Youssef.
So that would be Zia Youssef, who would take on the Home Secretary role in the event of a reform government. Of course, a big name, former chairman of the party, leading a lot of their policy work, a very big figure, often on the media. Zia Youssef now just walking up to the podium. We'll hear a little bit, just a little bit of what he has to say.
So I'm going to open with a statistic. 1 in every 25 people wandering around in Britain today arrived in the last 5 years. 1 in every 25 people in Britain today arrived in the last 5 years. Britain has been overwhelmed by immigration, both legal and illegal. Look, I'm the son of immigrants myself, and my parents, between them, have given almost half a century of service to our NHS. I'm really proud of them. So no one knows better than I the invaluable contribution migrants can make to this great country. But we have to be honest, the sheer scale of immigration over the last 3 decades has broken Britain. More people have turned up on our beaches uninvited in the last 7 years than stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. And those people, instead of being detained and deported, have been given free accommodation, free meals, free access to healthcare, free taxis, free leisure activities, at the expense of the British people, to the tune of tens of billions of pounds every single year. And that's just illegal immigration. If we talk about legal immigration, just since 2010, the equivalent of the populations of Edinburgh, Leeds, Sheffield, Nottingham... That's
Zia Youssef there, who would be Home Secretary in the event of a reform government next time round. That's what the Reform leader, Nigel Farage, has said. He says reform is, although with only 8 MPs, although, you know, it's gone up a heck of a lot in the last month, is the voice, he says, of opposition to this government. And certainly, Tom Slater, I mean, that is absolutely the case when you look at, for instance, you know, the local elections being cancelled. It was a reform challenge in the courts. They were due to go to court, High Court, on Thursday and Friday, that basically forced the government into a climb down because they said, oh, we've got new legal advice. I don't believe their legal advice, if they got it at all, ever said that it was legal to cancel elections because you were reshuffling the desks in East Sussex.
No, quite. And this is a clear way in which Reform have been acting as the opposition on certain issues which they're most passionate about. It's not to say that the Conservatives have been entirely pushed to one side. They do obviously have the dispatch, but they do obviously have Prime Minister's questions. But at the same time, I think a lot of people in the country, you sometimes have to remind them that the Tories exist.
Yeah,
given the fact that it's very much Labour versus
It is
Reform
fascinating that. And we take PMQs live on a Wednesday. None this week, of course, Parliament's in recess, so not tomorrow. But we take the first 6 questions that the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, gets to ask. But that's kind of often the only time you hear from them. I mean, again, they're the official party to go to. But in terms of the activity level, I mean, that's the thing about Nigel Farage, you know, the man has, I mean, he's what, 61 now. The energy levels are off the scale. And they are very active. It's press conference after press conference and press conference. So we have a big debate in the office. Like, do we take this one live? Do we take it or not? Because otherwise you'd just be doing just one long press conference. And yeah, I mean, and our audience, big Reform fans, they want to hear. But again, I thought I do think Zia Youssef is a superb communicator. And again, he briefly resigned, didn't he, at one point, then came back again. But talking about, you know, that stat, and I've heard him say it before, and I've checked, and it is true. 1 in 25 people currently in the UK walking around, you know, your cities and towns, villages, arrived here in the last 5 years. That is an astonishing stat. And it is true, but it also will have the ring of truth to people who are told, oh, well, you know, I mean, I keep reading articles by these very, very, very intelligent and well-educated commentators in the broadsheets telling us that net migration is going to go down as a result of the Rishi Sunak's changes on, you know, and we're not going to have the, you know, the Boris wave so much, and it's going to go down. But one of the main reasons it's going to go down is because there's going to be a lot of British people leaving, a lot of young people going, I'm out of here, this isn't going to work for me, there's no growth, there's no jobs. Youth unemployment now higher than in the EU, for goodness sake. And, you know, we're going to lose our brightest and our best, and we're importing people to do lots of very low-skilled labour, low wage, and they're not making a contribution. But the thing is, you're still looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands more people arriving in this country. And people can see it. Yeah. You can see it. You can hear it. I live in London. I mean, you know, again, it's quite normal for me not to hear a British accent in my, not just on the tube, in my own street. It's quite normal. And again, you know, when people talk about that, you say, well, that's part we're a thriving metropolitan international city. But did we sign up for that? And is that making it easier for someone who's born in this country to buy a home anywhere near London, or to afford, or to be able to get a job in our capital city? And that story is being played out across many towns and cities across the country.
No, exactly. And I think it's the thing that will ultimately, when we look back on it, have delivered reform to its current prominence. Whether or not they break through at the next election is
it can't be the only issue, though,
question.
Can it?
It can't be the only issue, but at the same time, it's something where, of course, immigration has been a perennial issue in British politics for decades. It's obviously one of the main, or not the only, motor behind the Brexit vote and successive Conservative elections, and of course the great betrayal of those Conservative administrations certainly create the space for reform to break through. But particularly the past 5 years, there is a way in which people who who might not previously have been bothered by this particular issue,
yes,
or did not touch their life in quite the same way, are suddenly talking about it. And I think that's what actually makes this quite interesting appointment, is that whereas there are some people under the reform fold who are obviously they're all united on this particular issue, I think there's something about the kind of clear, commonsensical way in which Yusuf puts it across.
But also he himself, the son of migrants, himself a Muslim, his parents came and worked in the NHS. All the things that other parties would like to use, the usual very, very tedious sort of racist, bigot, xenophobe, Islamophobia, all the usual things they could just shout at reform, which they do periodically every 5 minutes. Well, it doesn't really work with Zia Yusuf, does it? No, we're just going to go straight back to Nigel Farage now and find out what the next appointment is going to be.
Yeah, than that, could he really? Next up, the fourth appointment of today, and by the way, this is by no means the end of the process, it's just the beginning of the process. But fourth up today is somebody whose absolute determination in politics has always been very, very clear. And she is itching to get on with this brief, because I think that millions of parents all over this country are in a state of despair about what their children are being taught at school, about far too many young people being sent to university and being lumbered with heavy debts without any benefit to them in the workplace. And not only will Suella Braverman take on education and skills, something that's been ignored for too long, but she will also take on equalities under this brief, which of course means the world of DEI. And I know she's itching to get on with it. Suella.
So, as you just heard, Suella Braverman, another one of the Conservatives who's moved over to the Reform Party in the recent weeks. She's going to get the Education and Equalities brief. Of course, actually, Bridget Phillipson, currently Education Secretary for the Labour Party, and of course has the Equalities brief as well. Certainly, Suella Braverman in government was someone who spoke out very clearly, along with actually Kemi Badenoch and others on the DEI and culture war nonsense. Let's have a little listen to what she has to say.
Farage, to be Reform UK's spokesman for education, skills and equalities. Now, what we teach our children, and indeed how we teach them, has a profound effect on the destiny of our country. I've been passionate about education myself for years because education changed my life. And frankly, I wouldn't be standing here today were it not for the wonderful teachers, wonderful schools and brilliant education that I was so lucky to
we're getting a bit pushed for time, so just Tom Slater, I mean, there's another appointment, again, another Tory. Ruffles some feathers with the reform when Tories just turn up and a minute later they're given, front bench briefs?
I suppose so, but it depends which Tories and for what reasons. I think there was a fair few defections which took place, which did have a lot of reformers scratching their head. Jake Berry, who was singing the praises
Nadine
of
Dorries.
5 years. Nadine Dorries, president of the Boris Johnson fan club. Bit of an odd choice.
Still is as well.
Unrepentant. But I think most people see Braverman, they see Jenrick as people who are broadly speaking on the same political page.
Yeah.
And defections, I know people, are saying that there's a danger of becoming the Tories 2.0. I do get that. But at the same time, defections have always been part of the story of an insurgent party trying to displace two of the main parties.
We think of the SDP.
SDP, when the Labour Party broke through, loads of Liberals making the move over. It's just part of the process. It's usually a sign that something is going right. So, and certainly going right, quite literally.
Let's talk about your party now. Let's go. 11:33 is time. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, we're going to talk to former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards. What does he make of all of that? What does he make of the 14th, 15th, 16th, who knows, U-turn on local elections and plenty more. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 11:35 it is the time. Well, we've heard that new sort of, well, it's shadow cabinet, but sort of it. Front bench spokespeople being announced by Nigel Farage. They're no longer a one-man band, I think is the message they want to put out. Richard Tice, Robert Jenrick, Zia Youssef and Suella Braverman are the big four. He has been announced to the senior team. Let's talk about this with Paul Richards. He's a former Labour Special Advisor and is joining us to talk about this and a variety of other topics. I'm sure this isn't the one topic you want to talk about, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, yes, let's talk about whatever you like.
Well, that'll be fun. Paul, I mean, what do you make of this announcement? Because a lot of the criticism of Nigel Farage and Reform has been, look, you know, it's just a Nigel Farage ego, one-man band, and they haven't got enough people. They wouldn't be able to run a government. They've got all these defections from some, pretty senior figures over the years from the Tories, and they've put a couple of them in the front bench roles. What do you make of it?
Well, they've still only got 8 MPs, and the Liberal Democrats, for example, have got 70 odd. And it does remind me a little bit of when the Lib Dems would announce their shadow cabinet to the rest of us. And it's not really a shadow cabinet, is it? Because in our parliamentary system, you have a government and you have an opposition, and the shadow cabinet is the Kemi Badenoch front bench. So it's a stunt, and that's fine. I mean, I understand why he's doing it. You'll know what I'm going to say now, though, Julia, which is it does open up the charge that it's just Tories 2.0, a bunch of defectors and ne'er-do-wells, that the Conservative Party are quite glad to see the back of, now recycled in a different shade of blue. So it does open up Farage to that charge that they're not really an insurgent party at all. They're just a rest home for former Tories.
Well, yeah, and that is the criticism they have faced. But as Tom Slater, who's in the studio with me, has just pointed out, an awful lot of parties which have, been new parties do take people from other parties. But again, it's an interesting thing you say, perfectly fair, Reform have only got 8 MPs, but they've just managed to turn government policy on their own with this legal challenge on local government. We'll come to the details of that in a moment. But also they are riding high in the polls and have done, I think, for the last 200 plus polls. I mean, the reality is they may only have 8 MPs, but they're looking likely, as things go, long time to go to another election, not that long to go, though, to a local elections or Scottish elections or Welsh elections, looking to do very, very well. So we should be taking them seriously, whether we agree with them or not, shouldn't we?
We're totally taking them seriously, I can assure you of that. I mean, the latest YouGov has them down 3 points and within 5 points of Labour. So maybe the bubble is bursting. They have been insurgent, it's fair to say, and they have dominated some of the conversation too. And we're going to get on to the course correction, shall we say?
Is that what we're calling it now? Oh, let's get on to it. If that's what we're
it's I'm going to call it that if I can get away with it.
Is it the 14th, 15th or 16th U-turn, major U-turn? We're not sure. But for some bizarre reason, the government thought that rearranging the desks in various local councils would justify cancelling elections as if there was a world war on or there was a deadly pandemic. They were cancelled in 2020. I don't think they should have been in 2020. They tried again in 2021 under Boris Johnson, and people, including me, went, no, I don't bloody well think so. It's an outrage that anyone thought it was okay to cancel these elections, isn't it? But they've only put onto the right course because of their legal threat from reform.
Well, you point out that previous governments of different colours have done this when they've been reorganising local government without any great outcry.
2021, so there was a handful of councils.
Yeah. Well, it has happened. So there is a precedent, and the logic was it would be silly to elect people to councils that are about to be abolished under the reorganising. So let the people doing it now carry on for another year or two. Now, the legal challenge meant that we had to go to law on this, and the legal advice to the government now is that you can't do it.
Why would the legal advice have changed, though, Paul? I don't believe that. I believe either they had legal advice and said it was illegal and they did it anyway, or they didn't bother getting any legal advice deliberately because they knew they'd be challenged. And it was only because of the challenge in the High Court that we've actually seen this overturned.
Well, that last bit is true. It's because it's gone to the High Court. The government have said, well, hang on a minute, we don't want to drag this out. And the longer you wait, the harder it is to actually organise these elections. I think we never quite see behind the scenes, but, organising all the printing of the ballots and sorting out all the volunteer staff that come out on the day.
2.5 months.
And getting all the school halls booked and all that stuff is a huge job. And the people that organise this, the Association of whatever they're called, administrators, are saying it's going to be quite a tall order. Also, local authorities have now had to have 60-odd million quid extra to administer this set of elections, thanks to reform.
Yes, because
they're
Paul, this is an outrage. No. They haven't had to have it thanks to reform. They've had to have it because the government illegally cancelled elections without good reason.
Well, we don't know that it was illegal because
they've admitted it wasn't legal. They were going to lose the legal challenge in the High Court.
We don't know what have happened. That was the suspicion.
No, that's the government said. They've had legal advice that they can't do it. So
it's still costing us an awful lot of money.
But it's costing us the money because of the wrong decision in the first place. And who took that decision? The Prime Minister and the housing or the local government housing secretary, Steve Reed. Should one or both of them resign?
Neither, and I hope Reform are going to give their legal fees to charity too, because that is public money.
Why would they give them? They're going to be reimbursed for the 100 grand they spent on legal fees. They're not going to keep that money and go to the pub with it. The 100 grand has been spent on lawyers already.
You say that. I think they should donate that money to charity because
so they should be 100 grand out of pocket for representing millions of voters to challenge a government action that was judged to be not legal by the government's own lawyers.
Well, the bottom line is we're now going to have a set of elections in May, including in where I live in East Sussex. I hope that more than a third of people turn out in these elections because that's the normal turnout is around a third. 2/3 don't even bother to vote. I hope that Reform are now going to stand a candidate in every single one of those divisions. In every county they've triggered an election in. Otherwise, it looks a bit hypocritical when they're saying that they would have won anyway. So let's see full coverage for Reform, and let's see what happens in the actual results. I mean, the polling suggests that the biggest losers are going to be the Conservative Party.
Well, yeah, but depending on which councils, but actually it also looks like lots of those were held by Conservatives, that Labour will do very badly. Do you believe for a nanosecond that if all these local elections, and again, the vast majority of councils that did decide to pull off their elections, because the government basically said, you have an option, you can go ahead with them or not go ahead with them, which again, completely undermines the view that it was impossible to go ahead with them. The vast majority of those were Labour-run councils with the majority of Labour councillors. Do you believe that if those councillors genuinely thought that they would be re-elected, they would have decided to cancel? This is just gerrymandering.
Not at all, no. And don't forget, as you've just said, many of the people objecting were Lib Dems and Conservatives, saying that they didn't want to have the elections either because of the cost and all the rest of it.
Majority...
These are only postponements.
Well, let's not have any elections. Why are we having any elections at all? Because it costs so much. Why do we just have Emperor Starmer forever?
Well, because there's a huge set of elections down the line when we've got this new, reorganised, evolved set of new authorities.
If and when the desks are rearranged, we can have more elections. Democracy costs money.
Proper money. Well, I mean, this new devolution settlement with elected mayors in places like Sussex is going to be far better. And I would just say, let's hope people do turn out, a majority of people do turn out and vote, because, you and I love a good election. I stand in most of these elections as a candidate.
I think there should be compulsory voting. I think you have the rights in democracy, but it also comes with the duty, and you should use the vote. I just want to come back to though. You're of the view that the extra £63 million cost to the taxpayer and the extra £100,000 that is going to go on for reforms legal fees. You think that's Nigel Farage's fault that we're going to have to pay that because government doesn't have any money? It's all our money, rather than the government's fault for putting in a policy which they've now decided from their own legal advice was actually not legal.
Well, there was a plan in place to postpone these elections, thanks to a lot of the local councils.
It wasn't legal, and the Electoral Commission objected to it.
Well, the Electoral Commission is part of the blob, isn't it? This is an unelected quango, led by somebody who's never stood in an election. The
Electoral Commission is usually on the side of Labour, let's be honest.
Well, I don't know about that.
No, the Electoral Commission is part of the whole Blairite blob. Come on, who are we kidding?
It is, well, exactly, it is part of the blob. So why are you hiding behind what they say then? I don't think
they're not the only reason. If the Electoral Commission said it was okay, I still wouldn't agree with it.
They're not elected.
I'm trying to work out why you think it's Nigel Farage's fault. You can blame him for stuff he does. I've got no problem with that. Why is it his fault that he's won the legal challenge against something the government is doing that their own lawyers have said is not legally sound? And you're saying, oh, it's Reform's fault, there's all this money going to be spent. No, it's Keir Starmer's fault for cancelling elections, which should have always been going ahead, and then causing this extra cost. Should not the extra £63 million cost to the taxpayer of this U-turn, should that not be a resigning matter for either the Prime Minister, who might, or who in my view should resign on this, or the Housing and Local Government Secretary?
I mean, you think he should resign every day of the week. So
no, I don't.
The latest thing you think he should resign over.
No, I don't. I don't call him for. I don't actually.
Of course, it's Nigel's fault. Nigel Farage's fault.
He shouldn't have challenged it. He should have allowed the elections to be cancelled.
I suspect he's as surprised as anyone, frankly, that this is happening and going ahead. They're having to scrabble around to find candidates to stand in these elections that they've triggered, because most people assume they would be postponed.
Do you think, Paul? I want to clarify. Do you think
they're happening?
The right thing to have done should have been to not legally challenge these elections, for them not to go ahead, even though the decision to cancel them we now know was not legally sound. That would have been the right thing to do.
I think he could have made his propaganda points about democracy that he wanted to make anyway, and then we would have had the elections in the way that was normally scheduled, which was for not this May but next May.
Well, they were scheduled for this May, actually.
And £63 million could have gone into looking after older people or repairing potholes, and instead it's going to go to printing ballot papers and scrabbling around trying to run a set of elections in a few weeks' time.
And you think that's Nigel Farage's fault,
not
Keir Starmer's?
Yes, correct.
Mind-blowing. Genuinely mind-blowing that you think that, but there we are. Let me also ask you about where we are in terms of all these inquiries on Mandelson, inquiries about who knew what when, the Labour Together smear of Sunday Times journalists. Again, that seems to come back to Mandelson as well. There's also big question marks about the woman that the Prime Minister wants to appoint as his new Cabinet Secretary, Antonia Romeo, about allegations against her, which there's now been a cover-up of her being alleged to have been a bully and to have misspent government expenses. The chaos at the heart of this government is quite extraordinary, isn't it? And whose fault is it?
Well, I think to unpick all of those, there's different reasons for different things going on there. The Labour Together one, for example, is very egregious. If it is shown that ABCO, this company, did produce this report smearing to, as far as I can tell, perfectly valid journalists doing their jobs, then that's pretty disgraceful. And what the Labour Together people have said is that this company exceeded its brief and went far further.
But the smears were then spread around Westminster, so they obviously
that is, as I say, that is egregious, and I'm glad that we're going to get an inquiry into this and find out exactly what went on, because it's, I'm a member of the National Union of Journalists. I support free and independent press, and I think that it's a disgrace if that's what has happened. I mean, it's, in all my years, I have to say, Julia, it's the first time I've ever heard of anything like this, where journalists themselves are being investigated and then smeared in this way.
Kind of a Putin tactic, isn't it? Sort of thing that totalitarian governments do. And
I mean, on face value, it's pretty disgusting, and that's why I want to see an inquiry.
And what about the Cabinet Secretary? Is this show, the Prime Minister appointed Chris Wormold, again, and also ran as his Cabinet Secretary. I mean, he goes through chiefs of staffs, directors of communication and Cabinet Secretaries, like most of us, frankly, go through bottles of shampoo. What's going on?
Well, I don't get through that many bottles of shampoo, but I mean, there's a nerdy point here, which is actually how you reorganise the centre of government, and putting two jobs into one in the shape of the Cabinet Secretary just doesn't work. You can't run the civil service and advise the Prime Minister and force change through Whitehall in the shape of one person. So, actually, I would split those roles up. Francis Maude was saying something very similar today, and others have too. So I think a reorganisation of the roles as well as the personnel. There we are, nerdy but true.
All right, then we'll leave it there. Paul Richards, appreciate you joining us, former Labour Special Advisor. Really quick response from Tom Slater there. It's all Nigel Farage's fault we're spending this extra £63 million on local elections.
I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Or it could be the fact that it was Labour's fault for ever trying to have this fight to begin with. Of course, we could always say that any election would be incredibly costly, and why not just keep ploughing ahead and pour that money and resource and time
Chairman Starmer
into all the things that we care about. But
like giving Chagos Islands to Mauritius.
We do just about still live in a democracy, so therefore you would think.
Sorry about this horrible cost and bother thing that we're imposing on these elected officials. How very dare we? 11:49 is the time. Up next, we're going to talk about the latest net zero madness with our hero, Ross Clark. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Morning, welcome back to the show. 11:52 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Well, we had those announcements, haven't we, from Reform about who's going to be taking over as their front-bench spokespeople. Among them, Richard Tice, who'd be Deputy Prime Minister in the event of Reform victory. He'd also be in charge of a big super ministry, business, trade and energy. Oh, yeah, and adding in housing as well. Well, we know Reform's views on net zero. Now let's find out about how net zero is affecting all of us right now with Ross Clark, author of the brilliant book, Not Zero, How an Irrational Target Will Impoverish You, Help China and Won't Even Save the Planet. A title which comes truer every single hour of every day. Ross Clark, good morning to you.
Good morning, Julie.
Latest stories. We had some fascinating stories over the last few days about how Starmer was trying to tie us even closer to the EU with their net zero targets. We've had the various of these companies, these car companies basically saying, yeah, we're going to go back to diesel cars. No one wants to buy these electric cars, even if you're fining us a huge amount. And we've had Ed Miliband doing deals with Gavin Newsom on green energy. He's the governor of California and could possibly be the next Democrat contender for the presidency of the United States. What do you make of it all, Ross?
Well, I say they make a great pair, don't they, Ed Miliband and Gavin Newsom, because both are presiding over an electricity grid which is heading for absolute disaster. And if you wanted to take an example from anyone in the world of how not to build a green electricity grid, California provides the perfect example, because they've had mass blackouts for numerous occasions over the last few years, which Newsom, of course, always blames on climate change. It's always a storm or it's a heat wave or something, because the real reason is they're trying to build, like us, like Miliband, a grid that is very heavy on intermittent renewables. In their case, it's more solar than wind in our case. But, there is a fundamental problem, which I'm sure your listeners are intelligent enough to work out by themselves, which is that the sun tends to go down every evening. What? And Californians don't tend to like to go to bed immediately when it goes down. And as a result, they still use air conditioning, they cook and they go out to the movies and so on. And there's a very big problem, particularly in September evenings in California, where there's not as much incoming solar energy as there is in July and August, but demand for air conditioning can still be very high, and California just basically runs out of power.
And this, by the way, this is basically one of the wealthiest states. It's got the most amazing natural resources. If it were a country on its own, it would be the 8th biggest economy in the world, and they can't keep the sodding lights on.
No, and neither are they generating enough power. Like Britain, we import about 12% of our electricity now is imported from neighbouring countries. We're just not producing enough. Yeah. In California, it's like 18% of their, they've got these energy-hungry data centres. It's the sort of tech capital of the world. They're just not producing enough energy. They're not producing at the right time. Now, they've tried to invest in battery installations to provide, to smooth out the...
Well, we're told that's the solution here, aren't we?
Well, exactly. But in California, they've proved exactly why they're not such a good idea. There was absolutely massive fire last January with a battery installation near San Francisco, which led to 1,700 people having to be evacuated from their homes and taking out a huge slice of this energy storage capacity, and burnt for days and days. And
I imagine it caused quite a lot of pollution as well, funnily enough. But this is the thing, we know that numerous businesses are moving from California to Texas, where they have kind of the opposite view on the energy issue. But we also know that America has much cheaper energy overall than Britain. I think certainly for manufacturing, I think 4 times cheaper. But Ed Miliband has done this green energy deal with Gavin Newsom. Donald Trump said he was loser. I think it'd be hilarious if he runs as a Democrat candidate, because of what the state the state of California is in, whether it's homelessness, home building, business, energy, you name it. Utter disaster state. But Donald Trump warned that the UK's got enough trouble without getting involved with Gavin Newsom, as he called him. But there is this very, very big issue, isn't it? It's just a memorandum of understanding. It won't actually mean anything. But we do still have, and it's not just Miliband, it's Ed Miliband and the rest of the cabinet all seem to be signed up to this. Prime Minister signed up to this idea that we're going to go completely hell for leather for this net zero plan, signing up to the madness of the EU's net zero plan. And it's totally unachievable, it's totally unaffordable, and as the papers are reporting at the weekend, we are looking at, you can hit your targets or you can avoid blackouts, but you can't do both.
Well, exactly, and so California is rather proving that as well. And what's the wealthy Californians, well, you mentioned businesses moving to Texas, and also wealthy Californians moving to Florida because they've had enough of how the state is being run. Particularly the tech capital of the world. It has this very hungry, energy-hungry AI industry now, and The state is just simply not providing enough power. And of course, we've got that in Britain now as well. We've got Keir Starmer trying to talk up the AI industry, how it's going to save the UK economy and so on. And yet, at the same time, we're just not producing the power to feed.
And again, and we never will under this policy. It's almost like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, or the left hand doesn't even know what the left hand's doing in this case. Ross Clark, author of Not Zero, always great to hear from you. Thank you very much, indeed. Tom Slater, listening to all that, editor of Spiked Online. It's actually painful, some of the stuff that happens. And I've always said this thing, I've got the same qualification in climate science as Ed Miliband has. Zero, de nada. You don't have to have the maths of anyone over the age of 6 to understand none of these numbers match up. He knows it, they know it, his advisors know it, everyone in the car industry, everyone in the energy industry, the industry leaders are now speaking out and going, guys, we're getting a bit close to actually where we are going to have blackouts. Do you think we're just going to have to get to the point where we have the blackouts for everyone to wake up and realise this is all madness?
I mean, depressingly, I think it might have to get to that point. You would only hope that Ed Miliband would finally see sense, but it's not something that he's been great at doing over the course of his
But it's up to Keir Starmer ultimately. At the end of the day, the policy on energy is set by the Prime Minister.
The problem is, this government is so stuffed with political pygmies that Ed Miliband is actually a kind of towering figure. That's the unfortunate situation we found ourselves in. It's true. I mean, this is somebody who's being
at least he believes in something. He may be wrong, but at least he believes in something.
It's totally mental, but he does believe in it. That's one thing that
I genuinely worry is, but I'm sort of...
couldn't get rid of him.
I'm sort of at the point where he is still the most popular figure on the Labour benches to be the next Labour leader. I kind of want him to become in. Let's just go out in a blaze of glory. Come on. It would be fun for that week, as I keep saying, just for that 1 week until it all imploded. Anyway, up next, we're going to talk to one of your colleagues, Brendan O'Neill, about his brilliant new book, and a lot of this is exploding. That's up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good afternoon to you. 2 minutes past midday is the time. This is Talk, with the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. And, of course, whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, it is always fantastic to have you join us. Thank you so much for that. If you've missed anything from the show so far, some fascinating conversations, particularly on the local elections, have been cancelled and then uncancelled, and whose fault it is. Apparently, Nigel Farage is, according to a former Labour Party activist and special advisor. It's all his fault. We're paying an extra 63 million quid for the cost of that. And it's all his fault for challenging the government and government realising what they were doing was illegal. So how very dare you, Nigel Farage? Utterly bizarre, utterly bizarre. Anyway, if you missed any of it, you can check out our tweets. You can also, or posts on X. Still can't get there with posts on X. Don't forget to go to my YouTube page as well. Julia Hartley-Brewer Show is what it's called. Here's subscribe. You never have to miss a thing. Coming up in this hour, I'm going to be talking to the brilliant Brendan O'Neill about his brand new book. We'll be discussing Keir Starmer's U-turn, of course. 14th, 15th, 16th, we're not sure yet about the government has abandoned those plans to cancel local elections. Also, how disability and LGBT hate crimes, I don't know if it includes the A and the plus and all of that as well, but they're going to become aggravated offences. So if you target someone for a crime, a hate crime, who has those particular characteristics, that's a more serious crime. But should it be? We're also going to be talking about universities are facing legal action from current and former students who banded together over basically not getting taught anything during lockdown. They paid a whacking great fee of over $9,000 a year for tuition fees, and they got nothing in return. We'll talk about all of that. Joining me, I'm delighted to say, in the studio still is editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. Before we get to one of your colleagues, it's a bit of a spiked fest today. But just while he's waiting on the line, I have to say, just going back to the conversation we had with Paul Richards, the former Labour Special Advisor, absolutely extraordinary for him to claim that it's Nigel Farage's fault that we're going to have to pay 63 million quid more as taxpayers for the government to basically throw a load of money at local councils that were going to have their elections cancelled. They were allowed or postponed. They were allowed to do that. The government used a law which should have been used for wartime or pandemics to allow them to rearrange the desks and be useless at it and therefore not hold elections this year. But because they're going to have to organise them in a rush in 2.5 months, not quite sure why that is a rush, by the way. They're going to get a load of money thrown at them. It's entirely the government's fault. They said their legal advice had changed. I don't see how it had changed because the situation was always the same. And now everyone's blaming Nigel Farage for that. Oh, and saying, this guy was saying he should have to give the money, the $100,000 that's going to be paid for legal fees that Reform have spent already on lawyers for this case that was going to go to the High Court on Thursday, that they should give that money to charity. I mean, I'm thinking the lawyers might expect it.
Well, exactly. They weren't doing it out of the goodness of their heart necessarily. But this is the most lame deflection, isn't it? The reason that we're in this mess, the reason the Labour Party found itself in this mess is because it cancelled those elections, because it haughtily thought that it doesn't really matter, we're probably going to do terribly in them anyway, and who cares about their local councils? People really do care when you try and take their vote away, even though
even people who don't bother voting want to know they have the option.
Absolutely. And this is another mess of the government's own making, and to go around and be like, oh, Reform have now cost the taxpayers money, it's just rich. And also the other thing is elections cost money. We do it because it's important. We do it because people fought and died for these rights, and also because we all want to have an opportunity to give particularly incumbent governments a shoeing, which I'm sure many more people will relish now that these elections have been restored for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just extraordinary, isn't it? Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that as well with my next guest. He is Brendan O'Neill. He's the author of a brand new book called Vibe Shift, The Revolt Against Wokeness, Greenism and Technocracy. Delighted to welcome you to the show, Brendan. Good afternoon to you.
Hey, Julia, how you doing?
Very well indeed. We should come in the studio. We could have all gone for lunch after the show. Brendan, I always love your books because I think you always, as you do on our show and as you do in your writings for loads of different organisations as well as Spike, you kind of always tell it like it is. And we've had loads of books, haven't we, about woke is dead. I mean, Piers Morgan, other people writing all these books that woke is dead. I'm not really sure that woke is entirely dead. But your book is basically pointing out that actually there is what you call a vibe shift. And it's actually not coming from the politicians or the media or the activists. It's actually coming from, my audience, your readers, people just going about living their lives who are going, this is all madness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the death of wokeness has been greatly exaggerated. I don't agree with Piers Morgan, funny a man as he is, that, woke is dead. But there is a vibe shift. Things are changing, things are moving, things are shifting around in really interesting ways. And in my book, I look at that in 3 different areas. Firstly, wokeness, especially transgenderism, where women have openly revolted against that ideology for the past few years.
And it's very much been ordinary women, For Women Scotland and others, yeah.
Absolutely. Starting off on Mumsnet on the internet and then spreading to housewives and mums and people on women on the internet, just pushing back against a dangerous ideology. And then I look at the revolt against net zero, especially the farmers' revolts in Europe, which is just ordinary farmers pushing back against eco-hysteria. And then in the last section, I look at the revolt to restore our borders. You know, ordinary people across Europe, especially in the UK, in fact, are fighting to restore national sovereignty, to control out of control immigration, and to say, listen, we need to repair nationhood itself. So I think across those three issues, ordinary people have done the running. They've led the charge and they're changing the vibe.
Yeah, indeed. You mentioned on the last issue, on the borders issue, you know, it's those mums and daughters and sisters and grandmothers wearing pink outside migrant hotels. They're just going, no, enough is enough. We're not going to have our daughters at risk as they walk to and from school from illegal arrivals in this country who have a completely different culture and attitude towards women and girls' rights. And we're not having it anymore. And it doesn't matter how many times you point the finger at us and call us bigots or call us racist. You can shout whatever you want. We're going to look after our daughters. That is a very powerful message.
Very powerful. And it's coming from ordinary people, people who have to live with the consequences of these destructive policies. And what we have a political class and a media class who live in their little bubbles, live in their nice houses, live in communities that don't tend to suffer the same problems. And then it's left to ordinary people in places like Epping and around the country to say, listen, this policy is bad for our community. It's having a destructive impact on our daughters' lives, on community life. So this revolt of ordinary people against the lunacy of the elites, that's really what I'm looking at in the book. And I argue that we're witnessing a revenge of common sense against the madness of the people who rule over us.
And Britain has a very strong history of this. It does, doesn't it? But it's interesting. I was just thinking, you know, when you look at the trans issue, again, For Women Scotland and all their campaigns, but also, you know, your Sandy Peggies, your Darlington nurses. And again, the middle class, you know, lanyard wearing class going, oh, you know, but men are transitioned to become women and it's absolutely fine and we should be, you know, letting them use whichever loos or changing rooms they want. None of those women wear a uniform at work. None of those women are required to change into their uniform, get down to their bra and pants in a changing room with a man standing there in a bra watching them. And, you know, they didn't have to live the reality of the policies that they apparently had no issue with.
Absolutely. You know, the people who suffered most from the ideology of multiculturalism and the ideology of transgenderism were working class women. And that's why these problems weren't taken seriously for so long, because we have a ruling class that doesn't particularly care about people like that. But those are the people who bore the brunt of those kinds of policies, and they started to push back. We've had women at work, nurses and other women saying, listen, we want a single sex space, get these men out of here. And we've had women outside migrant hotels saying, look, we want to defend our communities. So at last, there is this pushback against these destructive policies. And I think that's incredibly positive.
And the same, again, as you mentioned, you know, net zero in the farmers, but also, you know, it's interesting that it's the trade unions representing, you know, working class, largely working class men in manufacturing, in energy production, in the oil industry, others basically saying, look, we can't have energy prices that are, you know, double that in Europe and 4 times that in America, because we won't have any manufacturing, we won't have any jobs left. And again, if you're in the lanyard class, if you're sitting there on your little laptop with your chai latte sitting at home, you're not affected by that. It doesn't make any difference. Yes, you might moan about your heating bill going up, but you're not living with the direct consequences of that, which is there are no jobs for you.
Exactly right. You know, climate change alarmism is the ultimate luxury belief.
Oh, totally.
If you are, you know, upper middle class, kind of part of the knowledge industry, not someone who works with his hands or has to think about how food is made, then you can wallow in this ideology that says the world is coming to an end and it's up to good people like me to save it. That's been the luxury belief of the past 20 years. But it has a terrible impact on working class communities, on farmers, on people who want to drill for oil or get a good job in the coal industry. Those people have been thrown out of work. They've lost their income. So again, we're seeing the people who bear the brunt of these policies pushing back. And I think the revolt against net zero is one of the most important of our time, because this really is the wisdom of the crowd coming back into public life and saying, listen, you've had your fun, you've had your pretend apocalypse. Now it's time for normalcy to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, immigration, massive big issue, probably still the single biggest issue in our country. again, people just saying, oh, you know, if you talk about this, you're racist, you're a bigot, you're this, you're that. But again, not living with the consequences of competing with these people for often low-wage jobs, not facing the consequences of competing with them for cheaper housing, for council housing, for getting a GP appointment, for crowding onto the buses in the morning, for getting their kids into a decent school, not living with the consequences because they can buy their way out of it. They live in areas where this isn't an issue. And then they can go, oh, isn't it wonderful, multiculturalism, we've got a wonderful deli at the end of the road. I mean, these people live in cow cuckoo land.
Completely. And in fact, they look upon these immigrants as a kind of army of servants who can help in their
classic question time. One of the audience, who's going to make my Pret coffee in the morning?
Who's going to make my Pret coffee? Or even worse, Zach Polanski saying, who's going to wipe our bums? You know, this is really what I mean, if you want to talk about racism, let's talk about people who want to bring in an army of servants to clean them when they get old. You know, that kind of the way in which they talk about immigration is actually quite repulsive. But you're right, it doesn't have the same impact on their income or their lives or their community cohesion in the way that it does for other sections of society. And I thought Marco Rubio, in his speech at the Munich Security Conference, made some really solid points about how if you destroy your borders and let them go to rack and ruin, it's a form of cultural suicide. And I think a lot of people in Britain, ordinary people, have recognized that as well. They're not racists, they're sovereigntists. They want to repair sovereignty in this country, and that's a very positive thing.
Let's face it, the R word no longer works, because you and I are both on the same side during the Brexit debate. We were called racist just for wanting to have accountable elected representatives in our own country. I mean, you know, they've been calling us the R word since then. It didn't work then, won't work now. But I think you had the same reaction to me waking up that wonderful June morning in 2016, realising that despite all of the propaganda, all of the lies, the entire, you know, sort of every big multinational company, all the media, all the pretty much most of the political parties being completely and utterly for staying in the EU, the British people went, nah, we want out. I mean, that was a wonderful show of common sense as well.
In my book, I refer to it as the original vibe shift, because that is really when a lot of this starts. That's when ordinary people defied the advice of their supposed betters, defied the advice of the business class, the political class, the media class, and said, you know what, we're going to think for ourselves, we're going to talk amongst ourselves for a few months, and then we'll vote how we want to vote. And of course, they voted in an incredibly positive way. They asserted the nation's rights against the EU oligarchy, and they said, we want to bring politics back home. It was a really wonderful development. It's really where the vibe shift starts. And in my book, I tried to say that populist spirit actually hasn't gone away. As much as the political establishment wishes it would, it's still out there.
And again, they use the term populist. I mean, again, doing things that the voters want. Oh, suddenly that's a bad thing. That ties me in very close, because again, my main reason for voting for Brexit was about democratic accountability. We were not going to have democratic accountability for local councils in large parts of the country. Some 30 councils have been given the option by the government, using laws that were supposedly for when there was wartime or a pandemic, to basically postpone elections, some being postponed over a number of years, councillors elected for 7 years instead of the original 4. And basically there was a legal challenge by the Reform Party. They were going to go to the High Court on Thursday. Suddenly the government's got some new legal advice and has backed down. They're going to have to pay Reform's legal fees, 100 grand. They're going to have to pay another 63 million quid more than these local elections would have counted to help these councils get their act together at the last moment. I don't know why 2.5 months is too long, is too little time, but there we are. It shows how absolutely abjectly useless our local council officials are. I'm pretty sure we could manage to do this in that time, but a huge cost. Should anyone resign over this?
Absolutely. You know, for all the excuses they've put forward as to why these local elections had to be cancelled, you know, that these are zombie councils, they're not going to be around for much longer, we have to spend money on potholes instead of elections, all that nonsense. The truth is they're just running scared of reform. They're running scared of the populist challenge against the Labour Party and against the Labour government, which I hope we will see across the country in these local elections. So this was an egregious assault on our democratic rights. That's what it was. And I think the establishment overlooked how important the vote is to ordinary people. Yeah. The only voice ordinary people have, they don't have newspaper columns, they don't have radio shows, most ordinary people don't have podcasts, although actually there's quite a lot of podcasts these days. They just have the vote. That's all they have. That's the only means for them to exercise their their power. To take that away is so serious. And going back to Brexit, as you remember, they tried to take away our vote for Brexit. So this was an assault on democratic rights. I'm so glad it's been overturned. Questions have to be answered, and I think heads need to roll over.
Yeah, well, one of the parties that is likely to do well is certainly Reform, and they've been announcing a new front bench team. But there's also the Green Party, we're told, are likely to do very well as well in these local elections. I'm just wondering what you make of Green Party members and even an MP going on what has been called a Jew hunt in various towns and cities around the country, Sheffield and Brighton to name two of them. You're somebody who, like me, felt spoken out very strongly on the issue of Israel's right to defend itself since October the 7th, but also about the growing anti-Semitism in this country and the need for people to step up, not just speak out, but act to stop it. It's the canary in the coal mine. You've written long pieces about this. You've written a brilliant book on Israel and how this is a major issue we need to deal with. What do you make of people going door to door and basically saying, will you join us in our boycott of Israel? And if not, why not? And what's your name, please? And basically keeping a list of, let's face it, Israel and Israeli sympathisers and opposers and Jews and non-Jews, which is effectively what they are doing in many of these wards where they're going door to door. What do you make of what has been called a Jew hunt?
I just wish, I really hope one of these people knocks on my door.
Me
I'd
too.
love to give them a
Me
piece.
too.
I'm just waiting for it to happen. Please come to London and do this. It's extraordinary, isn't it? It does feel like a Jew hunt. And people will say, we're just opposed to Zionism, we're just opposed to the Zionist ideology. Let's cut this nonsense out. Around 80% of Jews in Britain identify with the Jewish nation. They identify with Zionism. They think of Israel as their homeland, even though they are, of course, British and they belong in this country, but that's how they identify. So when you're knocking on doors and essentially saying to people, will you join us in our obsessive, creepy denunciation of Zionism? You are targeting Jews. You are making Jewish inhabitants of those streets feel profound.
And why aren't they knocking on the door saying, will you join us in our boycotting, of Iran or Syria or Saudi Arabia, or all these other countries where people are being treated incredibly badly by their rulers over the last few years. It doesn't matter who's in charge. They get treated very badly, where there are, extrajudicial murders and executions, and there has been real attempts at, at killing proper, actual genocides of particular ethnic and religious groups. No, they're completely silent about them. They're only concerned about one country, one tiny little country, less than 1% of the Middle East, and that's the only one they're concerned about. And it's just a complete coincidence that it happens to be the Jewish homeland. Complete coincidence, Brendan.
They just have this psychotic obsession with Israel. And I think it is a racist obsession. The Nazis, I don't want to get into Godwin's law, but the Nazis wanted to make Europe Juden-free. And now these people want to make it Israeli-free. They want to get rid of Israeli products. They don't want Israeli artists or musicians to come to Europe or Israeli academics. They have this obsessive desire to shield themselves from everything that comes from the Jewish nation. I think it's a racist campaign.
Yeah, let's just call it what it is. Just finally, this is a bit of a worry, and you've been to Israel, as have I. A Gazan mother, a Palestinian mother, has won the right to move to Britain, an immigration decision that could actually open the floodgates to numerous Palestinian refugees to follow. We've had various different cases on this, but it's a mother wins the right to join her son and daughter in Britain using, guess what? ECHR, European Convention on Human Rights. I mean, I've got to be honest with you, I'm really, really clear. Gaza is a population that is utterly radicalised. Not one single hostage from Israel who was held there all those, best part of 2 years of that time has reported a single incident where anybody tried to help them, where anyone offered them any kindness at all. We are talking about a radicalised population. I feel sorry for the people who've been radicalised, but I don't want a single one of them on territory, on British territory in our country. I am genuinely scared. I'm worried about the kids who've been brought over to hospitals, bringing their entire families with them, that they're going to stay, that we are importing, once again, radicalised Islamist extremism to this country by way of human rights. What do you say?
For this to happen in the wake of the Manchester plot to kill Jews, that wasn't plotted by Palestinians, but from two men from North Africa. Yeah. We do have to ask ourselves who's coming into the country, and do they have anti-Semitic ideas? Are they consumed by Israelophobic ideas, and if they are, then I don't think we want them here. But, the larger question that this case raises is about the ECHR. This case makes it so clear that the ECHR is a direct threat to our democracy, because the Home Office wanted to enforce this restriction on people coming from Gaza, and now it's been overruled by means of the ECHR. So the people we elect, the government that we vote into power, whether we like the government or not, has its hands tied by human rights judges and human rights lawyers. That is profoundly anti-democratic, and that's why we need to get out of the ECHR.
Absolutely. We covered a lot of ground there. Absolutely brilliant new book. Brendan O'Neill, author of Vibe Shift, The Revolt Against Wokeness, Greenism and Technocracy. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate that. Now, Tom said I'm not going to ask you to comment on what your colleague Brendan O'Neill...
It's available on Amazon now.
It's available on Amazon now. There you go, everybody. There you go, everybody. Just finally, though, I mean, on that issue, the ECHR, again, just being involved, these court cases where someone, I don't know, all these people, basically, if you've got a member of the family, no matter how distant, okay, this is a son and daughter, I wasn't able to decipher whether this child, is this a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old? Or are they in their 20s? That you've got, this mother has this right to come to this country. I think we just have to accept this as a radicalised. It's not their fault. A lot of them, you could say, not your fault if you've been radicalised by Hamas extremists in Gaza, but you are. I think they're a danger to this country. I don't want anyone from that country here. Full stop. End of. Nothing to discuss.
No, it's common sense. It also makes a mockery of rights. We have rights as citizens of this country. I don't think we need the ECHR to protect them. And of course, anyone who's coming from abroad should be treated fairly and justly and so on. But they do not have a right to come to this country. They do not have a right, certainly the judges do not have a right to write our immigration laws, which is what they're doing when they're handing down these rulings.
If they want to be reunited, but she wants to be reunited with her kids, and her kids can... Bye. Off
Plenty
you go.
of options for that. The idea that this is anything other than judicial meddling is just, you can't deny it anymore.
No,
I mean, this is trying to set our immigration policy, tie the hands of our elected officials. Even
and
the Labour Home Office wants to do this, and they're being stopped from doing it. This is dysfunctional.
There's one case involving mum and kids, floodgates. That sets a precedent, and they know exactly what they're doing. They do, absolutely. But don't worry, they can go to the Islington and Hampstead dinner parties and they can get a pat on the back for being so wonderful and virtue signalling. Meanwhile, they won't live with the consequences of this. 12:24 is the time to take a quick break. We're going to get to your calls. Lots of you still want to have your say about those local elections that are now happening. But whose fault is it we're paying all that extra 63 million quid? Because we were told earlier in the show it was Nigel Farage's fault. Isn't it the fault of the government for cancelling elections that it was illegal to cancel? That's up next. This is Talk.
The UK on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 12:27 is the time. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to have your say. Lots who want to get in touch about those local elections being cancelled and uncancelled. Vernon is in Staffordshire. Vernon, what do you want to say?
Julia Hartley-Brewer, you're amazing. Let's put it out there before we start.
I don't get this at home. I don't get it in the studio, to be fair.
How you kept your cool with the buffoon known as Paul.
Paul Richards.
I need to put him to the sword I wish I could face him off and just correct him. Democracy is clearly under threat, Julia, at this moment in time. David Lammy wants to change this, wants to change that. The only reason why these elections were cancelled is because Sir Keir Starmer got found out. Yeah. He's lied about this. He's lied about the Chagos Islands. Yep. The man is a pathological liar.
I agree with you. I don't even know if he knows he's lying. I think he kids himself.
Well, he doesn't come across his desk, does it? We best not say what comes across his desk. I'll keep the show nice and clean. But the reality of it is, Julia, the reality. I know you were worried then, Julia. So was I. So thankfully, I kept it right. So all I want to say, Julia, is that when you have people on, grill them like you do, which is great. But why on earth would anybody of any common sense be blaming Nigel Farage for wasting this money?
Exactly. When he was proved right, the government. I mean, again, this is my thing about the public sector. Whether it's things like the NHS or Westminster or the government in Scotland taking people to court over nurses being forced to change with a man in a bra watching them, things like that. If you lose that case and you spend all that money and it was obvious you were going to lose that case, you should face the sack and you should have to pay some of the cost. They act with impunity. They make these decisions and then it costs us, the taxpayer, millions of pounds. And there is never ever a fallout for the person who does it.
Julia, I travel a lot through my work, and it seems like politicians throughout the world have lost their reins.
Yeah.
I go to Germany. It's a disaster. Belgium, even worse. France, don't get me started. England, oh my God. It's just, we didn't vote for this.
No.
For me, I listened this morning to Nigel Farage's announcements. They're all excellent people, but they won't be getting my vote because I don't trust them.
Because they were Tories?
No, because Nigel's got history of not delivering. He's got history of...
To be fair, he's not actually been in power. I mean, in his offence.
No, I'm not about in power, but he has a history when things don't go well. My concern is that there's such a huge job in this country that needs to be done.
Yeah.
I don't see, Julia, Nigel Farage, Richard Tice, getting people on the plane and shipping them back.
I volunteered to do that job. I'll be a non-party political czar and I will absolutely do it. I don't know which I'd want to do more. Deal with the crime issue, deal with the woke issue, deal with the deal with the immigration issue. But I genuinely forget political parties. I just think you need like a party of just sort of all the sorting common sense people who are just going to go, we're just going to come together and do this.
But Julia, the best politician at the moment is Kemi. She's not going to get elected because of 14 years.
Yeah.
The only person that's going to deliver, in my opinion, shock horror, is Rupert. He's the only.
You're a Rupert Lowe fan. He started he's got his new party. He's made it officially into.
And I'm joining, and I'm voting.
Isn't that just going to split the vote on the right, and then you'll end up with the Green Party and Zach Polanski as Chancellor, for God's sake?
Can't wait. The tip man. I can't wait.
I mean, you called him what he is, yeah.
The long and the short of it is, Julia, is that I'm a realist. I love my country. My 12-year-old daughter cannot get the bus. You know why? Because she's not safe. My 10-year-old beautiful boy can't walk to the sweet shop. You know why? Because he might get stabbed.
That's the reality.
And anybody disagrees with that, you're on the banana boat. I just don't understand.
Okay.
We have massive problems in this country, and there's one person. Can you look at his interviews with Emily Maitlis? Emily, I don't care. I don't care. You guys are all saying things just to satisfy a particular community, not everybody.
Not everybody. Okay, Vernon, appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed. So Tom Sedgwick, let me bring you in on that before we go to our next call. We know Ben Habib. He's got his movement. I think they're separate at the moment. I lose track.
Plans to merge.
Rupert Lowe is Restore Britain.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Elon Musk's backing. So there could be some money in it, but. The reality is, we've got, let's face it, a lot of big egos in politics. And I'm sorry, you've got Nigel Farage, you've got Rupert Lowe, you've got Ben Habib. They've all got big egos. They've all fallen out. Nigel Farage has a history of falling out with people who question him. But at the end of the day, there isn't room for 4 parties on the right or 3, or I mean, lots of people even say even 2. But isn't this just going to the splitting of the vote? You end up the same thing that Labour are getting. We've got your party and Corbynistas and that other bunch of lunatics, and you've got the Greens, and then you've got the Lib Dems, you've got Labour, but they could all come together in a coalition after next election. They might disagree on a lot of things. They get a chance to be in power, they get those ministerial cars, they'll come together. And it's going to, you're going to see a lot of people not getting elected on the right because of that vote being split.
Well, I think Restore Britain is what happens when you confuse social media for the public. I mean, this is a problem the left used to have. They thought Twitter was Britain. Now sections of the very on-right think that X is Britain.
And
Rupert Lowe is quite popular amongst people who are very switched on in their right-wing political world. But when he was ousted by Reform last year, JL Partner did a poll. Most voters have no idea who he is. Most Reform voters have no idea
that's the
who
reality.
he is. So even if we're just talking about whether or not this is a going enterprise, people kind of memeing themselves into the idea that Rupert Lowe is going to be our next Prime Minister, the very best case scenario for them, as far as I can tell, would be peeling off votes from Reform in some key constituencies. Potentially,
that's
if they can
the
get a
only
ground
achievement
game
that's realistic. I mean,
which, as you say, raises the risks of some
I
kind
will
of
now be told I'll have the likes of the lot on YouTube saying, "Oh, you're just a voice for Reform." I'm not a voice for any political party. I can tell you what, I often get told off. Like they'll be, "Oh, you're being too critical." I'll be as critical as I want to be of anybody. I want to hold everybody to account. I'm going to take a really quick call now from James, who's in Yorkshire. And James, you want to have your say, don't you?
How they are going to attempt.
James, hello. Hello?
Julia, hello.
Hello. I don't know who you're talking to. I've only got a couple of seconds. I'm sorry to go so late to you. What do you want to say?
No problem. I hope you're well. No, I just wanted to say, as I was saying to one of your colleagues, I haven't looked forward to something for as much as this for a very long time. And when I say this, I mean at some stage within the next hours, couple of days max, Steve Reid and Keir Starmer, most importantly Keir Starmer, are going to have to do some sort of piece to camera, a talk to the country. They are going to have to squirm, and it will be in vain. They're going to have to squirm their way out of this with the local elections. And I cannot wait to see the tactic that they are going to attempt to
I think we've already seen it in some of the interviews. I mean, it was that Stephen Kinnock was out about doing the round today, and again, new legal advice. I want to see the publication of the previous legal advice and the current legal advice, because I don't think it was new at all. James, I'm going to have to leave it there. I do apologise. Please call in again tomorrow. We'll hopefully get you on air. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking to the founder of the Free Speech Union, that's Lord Young, Toby Young, about hate crimes against LGBT people, but also the Hamid Kushkan Koran burner case, and plenty more besides. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, welcome back to the show. 12:37 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk. Delighted to welcome my next guest to the show. You'll know him well, of course, Toby Young, the founder of the Free Speech Union, now a Conservative peer. Good afternoon to you, Lord Young.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. Lots to talk to you about. First up, a case involving, a man that your own union, I'm a member as well, has been representing. And this is Hamit Koshkan. He's known as the Quran burner outside the Turkish embassy. And he has got an appeal at the High Court. Well, it's actually, weirdly, it's an appeal by the Crown Prosecution Service against his overturning of his original conviction for the crime of, effectively, well, let's face it, they tried him on blasphemy crimes. Explain what's going on and what we're expecting to hear at the court today.
Yeah, so originally Hamit Koshkan, who's a Turkish political refugee, was convicted in Westminster Magistrates Court of a religiously aggravated public order offence after he burnt a copy of the Quran outside the Turkish consulate in protest about the Islamification of his home country, Turkey. And the Crown prosecution's argument was that because two people had violently attacked him, who'd witnessed this Quran burning, he had therefore caused public disorder and was guilty of a criminal offence. Incredibly, he was convicted at Westminster Mags, but that conviction was overturned on appeal in Southwark Crown Court by a High Court judge in a very good judgment, which effectively said that the right to free speech includes the right to offend and upset people, and if it doesn't mean very much.
Indeed.
And we thought that was the end of the matter. But then the Crown Prosecution Service, incredibly, appealed Hamit's acquittal. And that's the hearing that's taking place today in the Royal Courts of Justice.
I mean, it is absolutely extraordinary. And again, the fact that in the original case, and we talked about it on the show yesterday, the fact that the judge basically justified the fact, look, clearly what he'd done had provoked people because that man went and got a knife and said, I'm going to kill you, and repeatedly tried to stab him. I mean, it is an absolute miracle that Hamit Koshkan wasn't killed in that attack. It's caught on camera. It's not a question of did he or didn't he, or was there a punch and did it hit him or not. It's absolutely caught on camera, the whole thing. And yet the man who wielded the knife didn't even get a prison term.
No, he got a suspended sentence. I mean, if the CPS's appeal is successful and Hamit's acquittal is overturned and the conviction stands, that will be extremely dangerous, I think, because it effectively sends a message to religious fanatics up and down the country that if you want to enforce one of your religious blasphemy codes, all you need do is violently attack a blasphemer, and then the CPS will prosecute the blasphemer for causing a religiously aggravated public order offence. You may be prosecuted as well as the violent attacker, but be in no doubt we will also prosecute the blasphemer. So effectively this would be introducing an Islamic blasphemy law.
Yes, because only one religion. Have we not de facto got one? We've still got the, Batley Grammar School teacher. He's still in hiding with his wife and 4 kids after just simply showing a picture of the Prophet Muhammad to his children in a religious class, part of his teaching. We've seen again and again and again people being threatened. We know, certainly, I mean, gosh, Denmark and Netherlands, and we've had numerous, absolutely blatant killings because of this, and it's happening across Europe. We have a de facto blasphemy law for one religion, the only religion for which people think it's apparently large numbers of people, according to the polls, who are otherwise peacefully living here, think it's perfectly acceptable that someone should either go to prison or be put to death for offending against their religion or their prophet. That is the reality. There are things that I don't say publicly because I don't want to have a panic button in my home and live in fear for me and my family. It's already stifling our freedom of speech.
It is. I mean, I'm thinking about installing a panic button in my home, Julia, because the Free Speech Union, which has been paying for Hamit's defence throughout this process, along with the National Secular Society, may be targeted by Islamists. I mean, it's perfectly possible. At the moment, we don't have a de facto Muslim blasphemy law. We do have a de facto prohibition on breaching Muslim blasphemy codes for the reason you've set out. Why this case is important is that if the CPS is successful, then we will effectively have a Muslim blasphemy law in this country. And it would be very odd to just have a law against Muslim blasphemy, but not Christian blasphemy. After all, we repealed Christian blasphemy laws in England and Wales 18 years ago. And I think it would contribute, if the CPS is successful today, it would contribute to the perception that Muslims do enjoy additional legal protections that aren't extended to other religious groups. And that's not good for community relations. It makes people who aren't Muslims feel like second-class citizens.
But it's also not good for the majority Muslim population in this country who just like to get about their lives and shouldn't be patronised by being treated differently and expected that, well, you know, if they don't get their way, then they'll just get violent. That's a pretty racist Islamist, they might argue, viewpoint. It's treating people as different, with something that I think that you and I would not do. We expect everyone to uphold the same standards, which is, you know what, someone might mock your religion. Someone wants to tell me I'm going to hell because I'm an atheist. I'm like, well, fine, I don't believe in hell. It doesn't bother me. You can mock me, I can mock your religion. That should be part of our free speech in a free democratic society.
Yeah, I mean, there was a call-in show yesterday on another radio station.
There's another radio station.
and a caller called in and said, if it was a Muslim, if someone burnt a copy of the Quran in front of me, I would violently attack them because, in my view, that's wrong. Well, you know, it shouldn't be. I mean, you would hope that Muslims living in Britain would understand that it's simply wrong to attack someone else who is a non-believer for disrespecting your blasphemy code, just as it would be wrong to attack them for disrespecting a Christian.
And I think both of us would agree that we think it's not really a good idea for people to be burning any religious books or indeed books of any kind. I mean, but I think the key thing about Hamid Kuzgun, he wasn't outside a mosque doing it. He wasn't harassing people going to worship. He was outside the Turkish embassy. It was a political protest.
It was most definitely a political protest, and that was the conclusion of the High Court judge when Hamid appealed his conviction.
Well,
it was a political protest, and it's protected by Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights.
Do we know when we're going to get the result of this case?
We think that the hearing is going to conclude today, but we don't yet know whether they're going to give their judgment today. I hope they are.
Absolutely. Well, I also want to talk to you about something else. Hate crimes which target people on the grounds of their sexuality or gender identity or a disability are set to become aggravated offences under a proposed new law. It's an amendment to the Crimes and Policing Bill. It means that a crime is aggravated, so basically facing a tougher penalty. Not that anyone seems to go to prison anymore, but a tougher penalty if a victim is targeted because of those characteristics. We're told by the LGBT plus anti-abuse charity Gallup that this is a landmark moment for equality. Now, I don't know whether it includes the plus in this, whether if someone claims to be one of the pluses, they claim to be, I don't know, queer or the asexual, that would still count as well. But who knows? But why should someone attacking someone because I would argue whether they're gay, straight, think they're trans, black, white, man or woman, if you attack someone physically or you abuse someone, why should it be an aggravated crime because of those characteristics?
I don't think it should. What aggravated characteristics, what these aggravators effectively do is criminalise thought. What they say is that if you're thinking a particular thought when you're attacking somebody, then it should be punished more severely than if you commit exactly the same crime but aren't having that particular thought, which effectively criminalises particular thoughts. It introduces the concept of thought crime into British law. You quoted this justification earlier, just now, that it strikes a blow for equality. It makes our society more equal. That is Orwellian doublespeak. Yes. If you introduce protected characteristics into the criminal law, what you're effectively saying is that people who happen to have these particular characteristics enjoy stronger legal protections than people who don't. So how is that a blow for equality. Surely it's a blow for inequality. It is making some people less equal than others. It is a breach of the fundamental principle that everyone should be equal in the eyes of the law.
OK, Toby, Lord Young, Conservative peer, founder of the Free Speech Union, thank you very much indeed. Wish you luck with our Hamid Koskun case. We're going to go straight to a break. Up next, should be talking to, well, she's going to be a spokesperson for education skills and equalities for reform, as announced this morning by Nigel Farage. We're going to be talking to Suella Braverman. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. We actually were going to talk about something completely different in this section, but I'm delighted to say we've now got the opportunity to talk live at that Reform press conference to one of the brand new appointments to, well, the front bench of the Reform Party, Suella Braverman, MP, Reform UK's new education skills and equalities spokeswoman. A very good afternoon and congratulations to you, Suella.
Afternoon, Julia.
Thank you very much for joining us. Well, was this the brief that you most wanted? I mean, I think a lot of people might have thought Home Affairs was one that, obviously, having been Home Secretary, you'd be perfect for.
I really wanted this role, and I'm really grateful that Nigel Farage asked me to take on this role. I actually got into politics because of my passion for education. Education changed my life, and I see how powerful it can be for our country. And I helped to set up one of the first free schools in my hometown in Wembley, even before I was a Member of Parliament. So it's actually been an interest of mine. I've been preoccupied with issues to do with borders and policing and law for a few years, which stopped me from really talking about education. So I'm really grateful that I've got the opportunity now to support reform in this role.
My first instinct was this was a bit of a less controversial role than, say, dealing with the policy on immigration and things like that. But actually, the culture wars, which we are fighting, not just on the streets and on the airways, but let's face it, in our schools, is actually a massive big source of controversy. But not to most parents who just say, can our kids be taught facts and not ideology? What sort of thing are you going to be looking at dealing with? In particular, I think the number one thing a lot of people will be thinking about would be trans activism in our schools, the influence of the Stonewalls and others. What would you be looking at as policy there?
Absolutely. And this is one reason why reform is absolutely so robust on this issue, where other parties, I'm afraid, even including the Conservative Party, has been very weak in recent years. We've got transgender ideology kind of out of control in some of our schools. We're getting children, following the government's guidance last week now, in primary schools who may well be supported to change their gender. Yeah. That's what the government's own guidance says, that children in primary schools will be supported or might be supported by teachers to change their gender. That is an absolute disgrace. And so under reform, we will absolutely ban social transitioning or gender transitioning in all schools, primary and secondary. No ifs, no buts. It is a contested ideology. It is not biological fact. And for teachers, some of whom have been taken over by militant lobby groups, frankly, to be propagating this kind of ideology to our young children is wholly unacceptable, and it's gone on for far too long.
Well, I certainly give 3 cheers to that. And what about the climate ideology? Because most parents, I think, are completely and utterly unaware of just how much climate propaganda is pumped into their kids in pretty much every single lesson. It's like watching a permanent David Attenborough documentary on the BBC, what our kids are being taught. Most parents are completely unaware of it. Would you try and tackle that? Because I think a lot of parents just say, we'd really like our schools to be sort of teaching facts rather than political propaganda.
Absolutely. That's the whole essence of what an education should be. It should be founded in knowledge and truth. And that's why contested ideas, political campaigns, controversial ideas will have no place in a reform curriculum. We will roll out a balanced and patriotic and fact-based curriculum. And, we will do away with all of this rewriting or decolonising of the curriculum, teaching our children how to be ashamed of Britain's history rather than proud of it, and pumping out a politicised agenda on extreme climate ideology. Of course, we want children to learn about the environment and geography and science, but not for schools to produce the next generation of eco-militant zealots.
Now, is this stuff that you always have wanted to do? Because you know the criticism there is, which is that reform is now, Tories 2.0. You're just sort of Tories light or Tories strong, whichever you are, and Jenrick and you and others, and Nadine Zahawi, Nadine Dorries and others going over to the Reform Party. There are people who are staunch Reform voters who say, I just can't trust you because you were a Tory and you were there in power when you did all this stuff. The trans ideology madness, a lot of the climate madness, all of this stuff. It happened, and the mass immigration, it happened under Tory watch. What do you say to them right now?
Yeah, I'd be the first to agree with them, because the last Conservative government was a failure, and that's why I battled when I was sat round the cabinet table as Home Secretary and fell out with most of my cabinet colleagues, ending in Rishi Sunak sacking me because I was disagreeing with him on so many things, like leaving the ECHR or cutting visas or policing the hate marches, things that he wholly disagreed with me then. And ultimately, I couldn't tolerate the weakness and the failure of the Conservative Party. I've given it time, I've tried to be loyal to them, but nothing's changed. If anything, it's actually got worse. So I'll be the first to agree with people that the last Conservative administration and this current Conservative Party has woefully failed the country and should never be anywhere near power again.
Is this Suella unleashed then? Is this the real Suella we're seeing?
Well, I have to say I have had to bite my tongue for many years within the Conservative Party. I've always been a little bit out of step. I didn't really fit in that Rishi Sunak cabinet. I felt it on day one when I entered that cabinet, actually. I thought, oh, there's Jeremy Hunt and there's Mel Stride and there's Victoria Atkins. These are not people really that I really share much Conservative ideology or conviction with, and I tried to give it my best shot, tried to work, but there were too many disagreements on policy, and ultimately it wasn't a sustainable arrangement.
And you fell out with Rishi Sunak over policy. Are you worried that you could fall out with Nigel Farage? He has a history. I'm a good friend of Nigel's, but he has a history falling out with a lot of big political beasts, and we know one of them, Rupert Lowe, is actually still an MP, but has started his own party, Restore Britain. Are you worried that you might have a falling out with him?
No, I've very much enjoyed working more closely with Nigel over the last few weeks, but I've admired Nigel from afar for the best part of a decade. He was right on Brexit, and I became a Brexiteer in large part because of his leadership. When Theresa May tried to deliver Brexit but botched it, he set up the Brexit Party. I was a Spartan. I was one of the 28 Spartans who killed her Brexit betrayal deal, inspired by Nigel Farage, effectively. On many, many things. He's talked about breaking point and the unsustainable numbers of people coming into the country. He's been right time and time again. He's endured vitriol and backlash from the mainstream media and the establishment, and he's always come out fighting for the British people. And that's a unique quality and a unique level of determination that I admire, and I feel very lucky and grateful and honoured to be part of his team.
Well, it's a bed of roses right now. We'll see how it goes. Mind you, that you can say that for all the political parties right now. Suella Braverman, thank you so much for joining us. We're heading up to the top of the hour. She's, of course, a Reform MP now, for Reform UK's new education, skills and equality spokeswoman. Tom Slater, your reaction to what she had to say?
Well, all singing from the same hymn sheet, still, just about. I know there's been a lot of criticism online on and off about the number of Tory defections and whether or not this is diluting the Reform brand.
Depends who they are, though, doesn't it?
I think that was a good
You
example.
were saying earlier, Generic and Suella Braverman kind of got form.
At the very least, you could say they're clearly singing from the same hymn sheet. And I think one thing that's really quite telling is the level of kind of message discipline that a lot of the new recruits have brought in.